long would you fight a demon? Would you devote your entire life to one? When a man deals with a supernatural entity in his youth, it seemingly never stops haunting him, as its dark tendrils grab a hold of his life and squeeze with unyielding force. Will he finally defeat his childhood nightmare come to life, or will the force consume him and his family? This is the true and terrifying story of Bob Baker, otherwise known as the Nightmare in Bridgeport case, which took place in Connecticut. This is the Untold Story series, where we take a look at some of the most terrifying paranormal haunting cases and try to give the most in-depth story possible. With this story, I will warn you, it's been a while, but this case is particularly creepy to me, especially since I dealt with paranormal happenings in my childhood. So I would, as always, recommend that you don't watch this episode alone or in the dark unless you like a challenge. I will also be joined in telling this harrowing story today by my good friend, the Tape Library. This has been a very highly requested collaboration and one I've been looking forward to doing for a long time since I genuinely enjoy his content. I hope you all enjoy as well. And now, let's get to it. Our story begins in Bridgeport, Connecticut, a town famous for its manufacturing, especially in the late 19th and 20th centuries, producing goods like sewing machines, brass fittings, and ammunition. The town saw a population explosion with a growth of more than 50% during World War I. Known for many things, it would soon become known for something else, something far darker. The year is 1962, and the Baker family is living a rather normal and happy existence, with Mother Dorothy, Father Francis, and their 2 children, son Bobby and daughter Robin. It has always been a dream for the family to own their own home. That dream would come true following Dorothy's parents giving the family some land and a home that they could finally call their own. They couldn't have been more excited. Dorothy's father and brother had built the home by hand some years earlier, and her parents had originally lived there. But now, it has since been gifted to them to help make their lives easier and bring them all closer together. Dorothy's parents would then build a second home on the same land, essentially just a few houses down, making for a very close and big happy family across the board. With Dorothy being a homemaker, this is exactly what she'd wanted for her family. Francis, who is an ex-Marine, works at an aircraft manufacturer in Stanford. With a good job, a beautiful home, and family close, this should have been a recipe for the perfect childhood for Bobster. Bobby and Robin, who were very close as brother and sister, often relied on each other for entertainment. The two would typically play outside in the lush trees and bushes that surrounded their house. One afternoon, as the kids rush outside as they would any other day to play, they make their way towards the looming trees and green-leafed bushes. A man suddenly appears from behind one of the trees, asking her who this man was. He's puzzled by her reply. She asks him, "What man, Bobby?" Bobby, confused to say the least, replies to her, "That man over there by the tree. I'm looking at him right now." Robin says she doesn't see anyone. And although the man doesn't say anything or threaten the children in any way, something about him terrifies the poor boy. So doing as any sensible kid or person would do, he grabs his sister's hand and tells her to run. The two then bolt back to the family house. With the house being empty, they call out for their mother and quickly make their way out of their front door and into their front yard. There, tending to her small garden, is Dorothy. Relieved to see her, Bobby runs up and immediately tries to explain what had just happened. Dorothy, thinking that her kids' imaginations are just running wild, tells them to stop talking about a make-believe invisible man and to quickly go and start getting ready for dinner. Frustrated that his sister couldn't see him, and now at his mother's lack of concern, Bobby remains confused and unnerved, thinking back to that dark and creepy feeling he had just experienced minutes earlier. But doing as he's told, he makes his way back inside the house to prepare for the family to eat. Later that evening, Bobby is by himself in his room. He's playing with his army men toys, trying to forget the creepiness from earlier in the day, over the sounds of fake explosions and simulated gunfire that the boy makes. He soon begins to hear something else. He suddenly begins to hear his name being called. The first call startles him, and he looks around to try and find the origin of it. He then hears his name again in a low, hushed tone, and realizes that it's coming from the air vent near his bed. In later interviews, Bob himself would say that, "I was certainly intrigued when I first heard the voice coming from the vent. I was intrigued, yet also afraid." As the boy apprehensively makes his way towards the vent, he begins to talk back to the mysterious voice. As it asks him to play with him, Bobby asks, "Just where are you?" assuming the vent was coming from the cellar. "How did you get down there?" To which the voice would reply, "I live here. Do you want to be my friend?" Before Bobby has a chance to answer, the bizarre interaction is interrupted by his mother, Dorothy, asking him just who he was talking to, and Bobby would reply, "Just a friend." Thinking this was weird and feeling uneasy about it, but assuming it was just an imaginary friend, she doesn't make a big deal out of it. She instead leans into things, telling her son that he needed to tell his friend that he'd be back in a little bit because his grandma was coming over to spend some time with the family. As the two make their way out of the bedroom, little does she know that his friend is more than happy to wait for the boy's return. When Bobby's grandmother arrives shortly after, they greet her in the living room as a family. Living so close to them, she enjoys coming over to spend time with her grandkids and daughter. Francis, her daughter's husband, has recently also taken up a part-time job alongside his main job at the aircraft manufacturing plant in order to help make ends meet for the family. So in order to help take care of the children and relieve some stress off of Dorothy, she often comes over. This particular day, after she arrives, Bobby and Robin ask her if she can tell them a story. She agrees, and soon the four of them gather together in the living room of the house. She begins the story by asking them if their grandfather had ever told them about the history of the house they now lived in. With a resounding no, she proceeds. "Well," she says, "when your grandfather purchased this land and began building this very house, he hired a few contractors to assist in some of the construction. As they were digging up the dirt to lay the foundation of the home, they made a very strange discovery. As one of the men dug into the earth with his shovel, he made contact with something solid. Thinking it was a rock, he brushed the dirt off to the side to reveal something else instead. There, before him, he found a bone. But this bone didn't seem to be that of a small animal. It instead seemed too big. Placing it to the side, he continued to dig, only to reveal more bones, and eventually a skull, a human skull. Quickly getting your grandfather's attention, along with the other contractors, they discussed things as a group. Ultimately, though, they decided that they would not report the grisly discovery to the authorities. If they did, it would effectively tie up the construction of the house. Instead, assuming it had to have been an old previous family's grave or something similar, they laid the bones back where they had found them and simply covered them back up. They would then pour the concrete of the home's foundation over the top of the grave, effectively sealing it. Part of the reason as to why they decided this, the grandmother continued, was that winter was coming, and if they decided to wait any longer, they wouldn't have been able to pour the foundation and continue building the home because the ground would be frozen. With the children creeped out, the story time would be ended by Dorothy, who told the kids not to worry because it was nothing more than an old legend. In due time that day, Grandma would leave, but something else would not. As days turned to weeks and weeks to months, Bobby would continue to talk to who his parents believed to be his imaginary friend. His mother, by this point, had become fairly acclimated to hearing her son speak to someone, but she believed it was harmless. One day, as her son played in the living room while she cleaned, the phone would ring. Dorothy, setting her duster down, would quickly answer it. On the other end, however, there was some kind of voice, but it was masked by static. The voice then turned to multiple whispers that were too heavily distorted for her to understand. As she asked, "Who is this that's calling?" the line dropped. Perplexed, she slowly set the phone down and tried to go back to dusting the living room. However, Bobby, who had been playing, was nowhere to be found. Calling out for her son, she received no reply. Growing concerned, she continued calling out to him and frantically started searching behind furniture. Thankfully, she found Bobby laying behind a sofa, but in the fetal position. Relieved that she had found him, but now also concerned as to why he was behaving this way, she asked him why he was hiding, and Bobby ominously responded, "Because of my friend."
Bobby no longer enjoyed interactions with his friend. Upon hearing this, Dorothy became even more concerned, as she probed him for information as to why he felt this way. Bobby went on to tell her that this friend, this man, had turned from a friendly, playful type of person to someone who had become very mean and controlling, and this scared him. As she heard these words, Dorothy too became scared. In later interviews, Bob would say, "This thing became the opposite of what I thought it was. I dreaded hearing its voice coming from my vent, and it began to push me to do bad things." But despite his best efforts, the boy couldn't hide from him. One night, as Bobby lay in his bed asleep, he was suddenly woken up by the crashing of thunder and the flickering of lightning. As the storm assaulted the house, he quickly realized that his window was open, and rain and wind were rushing in. Directly across from where his room was located, he could see the family clothesline, and upon it were several sheets and articles of clothing that his mother had left to air dry earlier in the day. Then, without a gust of wind behind it, he watched as the sheet pulled away from the clothesline, and, as if it had a mind of its own, it quickly and aggressively flew through his window and onto Bobby. Caught off guard, the boy stumbled backwards and fell down as this sheet covered his entire body. He was pinned to the ground, screaming and writhing underneath it. The sheet began to pull tighter and tighter. A face pressed itself into the sheet before him and said the name. He then began to suffocate, screaming for his parents. The sheet was suddenly pulled away by Dorothy and Francis. They believed that their son had just had a terrible nightmare, but Bobby knew otherwise. In later interviews, Dorothy would say, "Bobby began to change, and this greatly bothered me. He was becoming more timid, more frightened, and I didn't know why. My husband and I began to notice that he was exhausted. He wasn't sleeping much at night and seemed drained during the day. Something, and I didn't know what, was causing this." The following morning, concerned for her son, she called in a doctor to examine him. Since he was acting so strangely, she believed that it could be some kind of medical problem that was affecting him. The The doctor asked Bobby a series of questions and ran several tests to check if the boy was healthy. With his vital signs and reflexes being just fine, the doctor concluded that the boy was healthy. When told by Dorothy that he had been interacting with an imaginary person and that he had been having horrible nightmares, the doctor again told her that it was perfectly normal for a child of his age to have an imaginary friend, and that the nightmares were more than likely a result of an overactive imagination. Although she'd been told that her child was healthy, Dorothy wasn't satisfied. She believed that the doctors had dismissed her and/or underestimated the severity of these nightmares and their effects on her son. But she chose to remain hopeful that for whatever reason this phase of his life would pass and Bobby would go back to normal soon. However, this would prove to be far from what would happen. Over the next several weeks, Bobby's behaviour would only continue to decline. He developed an absolute fear of the cellar. One day, his mother made homemade jam and placed it into jars. She asked her son to go down and grab some more jars from the cellar so she could finish her batch. Refusing at first, he was quickly scolded. At this point, Dorothy's patience had worn thin. She told her son that he was too old to be acting like this, and that it had to stop. Still terrified, but not wanting to get into further trouble, the boy slowly, and reluctantly, made his way to the cellar door. He opened the door and began to descend the stairs, feeling the presence of someone or something slowly enveloping him the deeper he went into the cellar. Finally, making it over to where the jars were stored, he turned towards the shelf and grabbed several. As he turned around and started making his way back towards the stairs, before he could make it, he heard a familiar voice from behind him. A dark, brooding voice called his name. As the boy turned around, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. A dark figure, with pale skin, stood before him. Its eyes were like that of a goat, its pupils horizontally elongated. Within its mouth he could see sharp and crooked teeth. Its hands contained sharp long nails at the end of each finger. The figure lifted up its hand and beckoned for Bobby to come. Feeling absolutely terrified, but also feeling a white-hot rage well up and out, while simultaneously throwing one of the jars in his hands at it. With this, the figure vanished, almost as quickly as the thrown jar shattered on the concrete wall behind where it once was. Startled by the sound of breaking glass, Dorothy rushed from the kitchen and down into the cellar to check on her son, frantically asking if he was okay and what happened. She was told by Bobby that he was okay and that the man was finally gone. Thankfully, for the immediate future, this was the last time he had to deal with the entity. In later interviews he would say, "It's like you're standing up to a bully, one you've dealt with for years, and you finally have your day. I basically took the house back." Bobby would return to being a normal, happy child once again, to much the relief of the rest of his family. He started playing sports at the encouragement of his father, and turned around his grades and attitude. He then effectively put the terrifying experiences behind him, and moved forward with his life.
The days turned to months, and the months to years. And over the course of the next 40 years, Bob would become a child safety specialist, with his career revolving around the safety of children. Believing his career was born out of his experiences from his own childhood, he wanted each and every child to feel safe, and be protected. Though this is his main career, Bob has also had a lifelong fascination with the paranormal as a result of those same exact experiences stemming from when he was a child. So he founded the Connecticut Paranormal Investigators in 2001 with several other like-minded colleagues. He wanted to help people who may have felt the same sense of hopelessness and oppression that he himself felt as a child. Bob's parents, Francis and Dorothy, still live in the same house that he and his sister grew up in. Bob often stops by to check on his parents and to help his mother take care of his father, who has suffered with Parkinson's and dementia for the last 10 years. His father, an ex-Marine, had always been so strong his entire life. To see him take a turn for the worse is very difficult to watch. Recently, he seemed to go further downhill, and at a faster pace. He started to complain about dark figures that no one else is able to see, and has developed an absolute fear of the cellar, refusing to even go near the door to it within the kitchen. Believing that this was just the progression of his father's disease, Bob is disturbed, but continues to do what he can. In May of 2003, Francis Baker would ultimately pass away. Following his funeral, Dorothy, after 50 years of marriage, now has to adjust to living by herself. After she discovers some of his old belongings in their bedroom, she longs for his presence. As she mourns Francis, she is startled when she begins to hear a series of faint whispers coming from the living room. Believing that it could be her departed husband, she finds a sense of peace within the experience and carries on with her day when the whispers cease. Although she felt as if her departed love was still reaching for her from beyond the grave, she would have a very different experience later that night. As Dorothy lays sleeping in her bed, with the pale moonlight draping over her, she suddenly wakes up when she feels a force upon her. Petrified, she feels the weight of someone or something depress the bed next to her. Then the experience turns violent. Whatever this thing was shoved her, then began to thrash her from side to side. Though she had believed it was Francis trying to communicate from beyond the grave previously, this energy feels very different. It feels scary, abusive, and smothering, not at all like her husband. When the evil presence finally leaves the room, Dorothy breaks down in tears, trying to come to terms with what had taken place. She contemplates life for several more hours, unable to go back to sleep. Finally, in the early morning hours, she decides to call Bob for help. Hearing his mother sobbing on the other end, Bob doesn't hesitate to come over with his equipment as soon as he can. After hearing his mother's testimony, he first dismisses her. He thinks that it's possible she had a night terror of sorts, or was dealing with some kind of anxiety, now having to live alone after being with his father for so long. He agrees to visit more and starts getting ready to leave. But when Dorothy grabs his hand, with tears in her eyes, and tells him that this presence was evil and that she was utterly terrified, he can't help but reconsider what he had initially thought. Now convinced that something could be lurking within the confines of his childhood home, he starts his investigation. Using an audio recorder, he attempts to capture an EVP, or electronic voice phenomena. As he records, he wanders throughout the house, asking if there's anything or anyone present that wishes to communicate. At first, things seem to be benign, but as he continues to probe, he suddenly feels a tension building within his chest. Then, he hears footsteps cross the path in front of him. With this, he feels nauseous. In this very moment, it's as if he's been sucked into a rift in time. He is taken back to the very moment when he first encountered the malevolent entity all those years ago as a boy. Terror-stricken, but not wanting to further scare his mother, he decides to tell her that he believes that there is something there within the home, and that they should have it blessed. He promises he will come back shortly with his team to further dig into just what they could be dealing with.
Later that day, several members of the Connecticut Paranormal Investigators arrived. In Bob's words, it was bizarre to me because here I was, after all these years back in the same exact place where it all started for me. Bob is accompanied by his colleague Joel Myers, as well as Mary Curran. Mary, like Bob, was plagued by the paranormal in her childhood as well, and seems to have an extra sense when it comes to dealing with the supernatural. As per her ability, Mary is not given any details about the case, and is sent in first, acting almost as some kind of radar to see if there is something there, and if it's good or bad. Within minutes of being inside, she senses a man and a woman, among several other spirits. As she continues to walk throughout the house, she makes her way into Bob's old bedroom, and it is here that she senses something. evil. But it's not coming from directly inside the bedroom itself, rather seeping into the room from the vent, the very same vent that leads to the cellar. Notifying Bob and Joel of her findings, she tells them that they need to investigate the cellar, because she believes that it's possible that this darker entity may have something to do with the other spirits within the house. In her own words, as we stepped down each step of the stairs leading into the cellar, the oppression became thicker and thicker, finally making it down to the base level floor. She continues to walk around and pick up on numerous things, as Bob and Joel take photos of the area for any potential evidence. Mary believes that something tragic occurred, something awful, that now haunts the land itself, something that, when it occurred, drew this negative energy in as a beacon of sorts. In her mind's eye, she sees a vision of a man carrying bodies and burying them on the land. She now believes that perhaps these very same people are now buried underneath the house itself. Again, she has no prior knowledge about anything related to the house or the case. Following this vision, she sees something else appear before her. There, tucked in the darkest corner of the cellar, she sees an abhorrent, robed figure with horrendous features. She believes that this entity is a demon. Asking Bob if he too sees the manifestation, she points to where it had appeared. After being asked to describe it, Bob is speechless. What she describes to him is the very same entity that he had stood up to when he was a child. In his own words, "I never told Mary about my experiences, or anything else about this house, and to have her describe to me exactly what I had seen myself was scary, but also such a relief to me. It meant that what I had seen was real." The team decides to stay overnight to continue the investigation and to review the photos and recordings they had taken for any potential evidence, as well as to keep an eye on Dorothy and allow her to feel protected. As they review numerous photos, they eventually come across something peculiar in one of them that was taken in Bob's old room. At first glance, it appeared to be an orb. In Bob's words, it seemed to be an orb, and I usually tend to dismiss those because they're more often than not a speck of dust or water vapour, but this one was different. Upon closer inspection, when zoomed in, it appeared to contain a face, one that was gnarled and rotting. It was the face of the same demon that Bob had seen all those years ago. Although this is incredibly unnerving, Bob does find solace knowing that he now has some kind of proof of its existence. As the team continues to dive into more photos, Dorothy is suddenly woken up by the feeling of two large hands pressing down on her shoulders and back, forcing her face into her pillow. Then there is a booming noise as her bed begins to shake up and down. Screaming out for her son, Bob and his team rush to her bedroom. Whatever this thing was, it released her as they forced open the door. Dorothy would later say, "I now knew that I was living in a house with something that could physically hurt me. I was terrified, and I certainly didn't want to be there anymore." Bob now believes that the malevolent entity that is plaguing his mother is the very same one that plagued his childhood.
Greatly concerned for his mother's welfare, they both decide at that moment that she will move out of the house and come to live with Bob. With his mother now out of the haunted house, the group has also decided to bring in a Catholic priest, believing that whatever demonic force that dwelled within the walls of the home was far beyond their capabilities to defeat. They anxiously await his arrival. Soon, they receive a knock at the door. Upon answering it, Bishop Robert McKenna steps over the threshold and into the home. Bishop McKenna is a world-renowned exorcist and no stranger to evil. They hope that with his assistance, they can finally free the house of this tormentor. Wasting no time, the bishop begins the exorcism prayer and walks from room to room throughout the house, sprinkling holy water as he consecrates the home. He's ultimately drawn to the cellar. Making his way through the kitchen and opening the door leading to it, He seems to have a sixth sense as to where the entity dwelled. He was not given specific details about the case, only what had happened, not where. As he walks down each step further descending, he is suddenly and viciously shoved by an unseen force. This violent push sends him falling down the rest of the stairs. As the group rushes to assist him at the bottom, they realize that this demon has real power. If it could shove a bishop down a flight of stairs, it might be capable of much more. Thankfully, Bishop McKenna isn't seriously harmed. If anything, he's angry and further determined to attack the devil. As he continues his prayers and holds a blessed crucifix high into the air, they begin to hear sounds echo all around them in the dark cellar. This was almost certainly due to the agitation the bishop was causing the demon, though the atmosphere grows thick with animosity and the noises further intensify. The group stands their ground and begins to pray with the bishop. With the lights flickering and the sounds louder than ever, and items now being hurled around the cellar, they focus on the bishop's words and hope their efforts will work. As the activity and the prayers both reach a synchronized crescendo, things suddenly cease as quickly as they had started. Sighing and feeling relieved, they all believe the demon has been vanquished. The environment seems lighter and calmer. They then head upstairs, thanking the bishop for his help, believing that he was the ace in the hole for the fight itself. They would then pack up and leave for their respective homes for the rest of the day. Later that night, with his mother still at his home, Bob is greatly relieved, believing that the entity is finally gone and that he can, in good conscience, allow his mother to return to the house, knowing she'll be safe. It's lightly raining outside, and the droplets pelt the outside of his bedroom window as Bob lies in his bed, drifting off to dreamland. All seems peaceful until his sheet is suddenly wrapped around his head. Screaming and gasping for air, he's being suffocated, just as he had when he was a child that stormy night all those years ago. Finally, through the thrashing, he's able to free himself from this cocoon of suffering. Shocked and upset, he now believes that their efforts have only angered the demon. It was most certainly not gone, but rather had followed him home, violating what should have been his sanctuary. With this revelation, over the course of the next several months, Bob and his team battle the demon with help from various outside organizations. Different blessings and religious groups are brought in, yet nothing seems to work. Also beginning to be attacked late at night is Bishop McKenna, who realizes that prayer alone has failed. The entity is much stronger than any of them realize. He arranges with Bob and the Connecticut paranormal investigators to return to Dorothy's home to try and rid the demon from the premises once again. When the day comes, the bishop returns with Bob, Mary, and Joel, and in conjunction with another exorcism prayer, he fills the house with thick plumes of blessed incense. This time, the blessing doesn't seem to cause the entity to manifest physically. Upon finishing, they have the back and front doors open to expel the entity and allow the incense smoke to escape the home. They thank Bishop McKenna once again for his time and efforts. Following his orders, upon the smoke departing the home, they allow it to sit for a week before returning, hoping that the demon has been vanquished back to hell. Upon returning, Bob and Joel sit at the kitchen table, comparing notes and evidence. They had been there for several hours with no interruptions. That was until they heard 3 distinct knocks emanating from the cellar door. These knocks continued to repeat, and alongside this, they began to hear footsteps walk throughout the house. As the men glance at one another in disbelief, the footsteps begin to make their way toward the kitchen where they both are. Within seconds, both men grab their chests and fall to the floor, unable to breathe. In Bob's words, it felt like I was having a heart attack, like the weight of an elephant was sitting on my chest. I could not breathe at all. Fearing for their lives, Bob manages to get back to his feet and begins dragging Joel toward an upright position. The two men then flee the home in utter panic. Believing this attack to not only be spiritual, but also a near-death experience as a result of it, Bob decides to call it quits. Although he doesn't want to stop fighting, he believes that anyone involved may lose their lives as a result of the battle, so he vows to never return to the home. Nobody, to this day, has set foot back in the house. Feeling as though he was perhaps too close to the situation, that he should have let someone else conduct the investigation from the outside, but also now knowing how powerful the entity is, and having exhausted every effort, Bob didn't want anyone else to have their lives put at risk either. You essentially have to know when to hold them, and when to fold them, as the old saying goes. Digging into this case was utterly fascinating to me, and there are a few updates and opinions I'd like to share with you now. As far as updates go, Bishop Robert McKenna is no longer with us. He passed away on December 16th of 2015 at the age of 88. He had been involved in numerous famous haunting cases, such as the Smurl haunting case, as well as many other lesser-known cases. Robin Baker, married name Robin Santiago, passed away peacefully on Sunday, July 21st of 2019, at the age of 64. And lastly, Dorothy Baker passed away on February 1st of 2021 at the age of 87. Never having remarried, she hopefully has now been reunited with her beloved Francis and her loving daughter Robin. I researched as deeply as I could to avoid any misinformation, and I believe I found both Bob's company and his paranormal investigation website. Bob seems to still be with us, and I hope wherever he is, that he's thriving with his wife and family. I'm not going to share the company information or location to help maintain Bob's privacy. However, regarding his paranormal group, the Connecticut Paranormal Investigators, I'm unsure if they're still active. I was able to find their old website link, but upon clicking on it, it redirects to an archived site of a group known as Montana Paranormal. This group, at least as of last year, seems to still be active, but upon checking their staff directory, I didn't see Bob listed, so I don't believe he's affiliated. Bob's story was made famous by the show A Haunting, with the release of the episode An Evil in Bridgeport, which was later renamed The Nightmare in Bridgeport, which originally aired on October 26th of 2012. Shortly after this time, Bob also did an interview with AOL for their YouTube channel. As for the case details themselves, I believe that odds are there had to have been some kind of killing and the bodies buried upon the land. Perhaps with the violent nature of the deaths, it could have attracted something evil, like a demon. With the bodies sealed underneath the foundation of the home, the poor souls trapped within never may be able to leave. This, and/or they're being held captive as a power source by the demon itself. It certainly had to have been difficult to choose to walk away from the situation when he had been battling this creature since his childhood. But I do ultimately think that Bob made the right choice. I do think that if another group had been willing to take their chances, that they should have been allowed to investigate the property. But I also respect him for not wanting other people to be put in harm's way. As far as the house goes, despite my best efforts, I'm unsure just what happened to it. If it still stands vacant today, or has since been sold off. That would be something Bob himself would have to answer if he ever sees this video. And as with all the cases that we've covered here, we are sometimes left with more questions than answers. But one thing remains certain. There was some kind of dark demonic force that stalked the walls of the Baker family home for one reason or another, one that tormented them with bated breath, seizing every opportunity to attack the weak. Stay safe out there. Stay vigilant. Don't allow yourself to become a sheep for the devil's wolf. Imaginary friends are generally considered to be a normal part of childhood development for some. But what would you do if your child's imaginary friend turned out to be much more than just imagination? When a woman notices that her son is speaking with a friend who she thinks doesn't exist, she dismisses it at first. However, this so-called friend would turn out to be anything but, as an abhorrent force turns their lives upside down. Will they escape with their souls intact, or will the entity consume them? I will warn you, as with many cases I've covered on this channel, to not watch this alone or in the dark unless you like a challenge, because this case is certainly no exception. Kentucky, a bastion of American beauty, wild and free on the surface, also harbors darkness. Home to the Mammoth Cave system, known to be the longest in the world, one can truly get lost inside its winding caverns and crevices. Kentucky contains many tales of legends, folklore, and hauntings, with caves older than bone beneath it, and numerous battles fought on its surface, among other happenings. It's no surprise that this southern state holds such secrets. Our story begins in western Kentucky with the Foster family, Jan, Dale, their 5-year-old son Cody, and 16-year-old daughter Pamela. Jan is a carrier for the U.S. Postal Service, and Dale is a contractor. Up until this point, the Fosters have been a relatively normal American family, but this would soon change. A nanny often stays with their son while the two parents work during the day, and tends to leave when one of the parents gets home from work for the day. One evening, the nanny asks for a word with Jan. With the two stepping off into the hallway for a more private word together, the nanny tells her that Cody has been using some very bad language, and that she's concerned about his behavior. Jan is shocked to hear this because they've always considered themselves a fairly strict family on what can and can't be said in their house, so she's not sure where the boy would have heard such language. Alongside the curse words, Cody has been incredibly defiant, extremely rude, and angry towards the nanny. He has also been speaking with someone who isn't there. After assuring the nanny that Cody was not exposed to this kind of behavior in their home, Jan then said she would correct his behavior and apologized for these very unexpected happenings. Several hours later, as she tucks her son into bed for the night, she asks him to tell her about his new friend. Cody tells his mother that his friend's name is Man. Thinking this was strange, and asking him why doesn't his friend have a real name, like John or George, she is quickly corrected by her son that it is simply Man. Finding this bizarre, but believing this to be somewhat normal, that her son is simply using his active imagination to create a friend who didn't really exist, she thinks nothing of it. However, in later interviews, she would have this to say: "I didn't realize it then, but this was a massive warning sign, and it's one I shouldn't have ignored." Shortly after putting her son to bed and laying down herself, Jan is woken up by the sound of thumping from across the hall. Stepping out into the hallway to examine just what this could be, she then hears the laughter of her son. Believing he's just playing and very tired herself, she asks him to please stop through his door and to go back to bed. She then heads back to her own bedroom once again after the laughter ceases. Several hours later, in another bedroom down the hall, 16-year-old Pamela is woken up out of a sound sleep herself, but by something very different. Feeling as if she was being watched, she begins to hear scratching originating from underneath her bed. Perplexed, she rolls out of bed to look underneath it, and quickly, she comes face to face with nothing. The scratching then begins to move as if it's under the floorboards. It moves from underneath the bed, through the floor, and then up into the wall closest to her bedroom door. The poor teen has never experienced anything like this before. As the sounds continue, she quickly, yet cautiously makes her way out of her bedroom and into her parents' room. She would later describe the scratching sounds like someone taking their fingernails and with all of their strength, grating them against the various surfaces as the sound moved. Jan is startled awake as she sees a blackened figure standing over her. It's Pamela, telling her mother that she's scared. Jan, then thinking she must have had a nightmare, brings her into the bed to quell her fear. Although this night was strange to say the least, it's nothing compared to what's coming. The following morning, as Jan wakes up and begins getting ready for the day, she steps into the shower and begins washing herself. Several minutes into her shower, however, she hears something fall over in the bathroom, with the door closed, and after examining the room from the tub, she sees no one. She does, however, see a soap bottle that has fallen onto the floor from the side of the bathtub. Thinking this was weird due to its positioning, but overlooking it, she simply places the bottle back onto the ledge and continues with her shower. She then begins to hear footsteps walking all throughout the bathroom, rinsing the soap out of her hair and making sure she doesn't get any in her eyes. She then turns around and sees the outline of a man through the steamed up shower curtain. This man was tall, much taller than her husband, and she didn't hear the door open to indicate anyone else's presence. Panicking, she pulls the curtain aside, yet no one is there yet again. She does, however, see small, muddy, child-sized shoe prints on the floor. Quickly finishing her shower, and after drying off, she finds and checks Cody's shoes, but there are no signs of mud to be seen. This makes her uneasy because only his shoes would have even been close to how small the shoe prints were. Then, heading to her son's room to see if he was awake or not, she finds him playing with his toy fire truck in the corner of the room, yet he is speaking to a chair where no one is sitting. Telling his friend that he didn't want to do that he just wants to play with his toys, Cody is then interrupted by his mother, who asks him just who he's speaking with. Replying with, "Man," the little boy then continues to play with his fire truck. Jan then tells Cody that he needs to tell his friend goodbye, and that it's time to get ready for the day. This seems to turn a switch within the boy. Suddenly, her 5-year-old has gone from happy and playing with his toys to becoming irate at the drop of a dime. Screaming at his mother that he didn't want to and that man said he didn't have to. Being countered by his mother, she tells him that he will get ready, or there's gonna be serious consequences. Scowling at her, eventually, he does as he's told. But the look behind his eyes is one his mother doesn't recognize, and it'll become one all too common in the near future. Over the next several weeks, Cody's behavior has shifted completely. He's gone from a fairly calm and loving child to one that is cold, angry, and sometimes violent. He doesn't want to follow commands or do things he once enjoyed doing. He only wants to spend time with his imaginary friend, someone he calls man. One afternoon, as his parents sit together watching their son play, they ask him to tell them about man. Just who is he, and how old is he? Cody would set down the toys that he had been playing with and tell them he's 6, and that he has brown hair and brown eyes and pale skin. Interested in what he had to say, the couple would then ask their son, just where did man come from? He would respond with, from behind the park, where the lake is, from deep underground. Obviously concerned and intrigued even further, Jan asked Cody if something happened to man. Cody, with tears streaming down his face, would reply that a stranger took him from his mommy and did terrible things to him. That he cried for his mommy, but she never found him. With tears now falling from her eyes, Jan then asks her son, who would almost be the same age as man, is man dead, Cody? His answer would cause a cold shiver to shake her entire body. He would answer with, yes. Disturbed by her son's answer, Jan Foster believes that her son may have befriended the spirit of a dead child. Dan, however, is not fully convinced backstory to his imaginary friend. He thinks that it's just that, imaginary. With this revelation, Jan decides to take researching things into her own hands. She decides the following day to go to the local library and to sift through records to see if she could find anything that sounded similar to the backstory of the boy that her son described to her. She avidly searches, going back as far as the records do that were available, about 50 years or so. Although she believes her son believes the story he told her, she begins to doubt what this entity could have told her son, because no evidence materializes of the dead boy's backstory. Over the next several months, Cody withdraws completely from interacting with the family. He didn't want to spend time with anyone. He stopped playing with his toys, and his only outlet seems to be man. Day in and day out, he just continues to have full-blown conversations with this invisible person. Angered and feeling as if she was losing her son, Jan decides to try anything it takes to get him back. One evening, she makes a phone call to an old friend of hers, a Native American medicine man who she believes could perhaps offer insight on what to do about her family's situation. Within a day, he arrives. Speaking with Jan and Dale in their living room, he begins to hear from Jan just what all has been taking place. Dale, although skeptical of both his son's situation and now the involvement of a medicine man, remains so, but wants to support his wife, thinking that this could perhaps make her feel better about what had been happening. In his own words, I was concerned that something had really scared Jan, and I knew that she was upset. Although I didn't believe in this kind of stuff, I thought that maybe it could help her feel better. As Jan finishes explaining the situation as a whole to the medicine man, he comes to the conclusion that it's possible that Cody has invited the spirit into the house. He explains that the only way to get rid of the spirit is to revoke the invitation by praying and forcibly cleansing the home. That the owner of the house had to do this on their own to banish the spirit. He then instructs Jan to burn sage and sweetgrass and direct it towards the four corners of the property. After this is done, each doorway of the home must be anointed with olive oil to finish the cleansing. He also warns that some spirits may not want to go so easily, and that it's imperative that she focus and pray the entire time for the spirit to leave, and most importantly, to pray for her son. The following morning, after everyone else had departed for the day, Jan begins the ritual. As the sage smoke smudges the air, Jan begins to worry, but tries her best to remain strong. In her own words, "Was I worthy enough of God to hear my prayers, my strongest pleas to Him to help me through this, to help me cleanse this house and this property? I doubted myself for brief moments, that I wouldn't be able to. It was the fear of knowing if it didn't work, what would happen then?" Within due time, she finishes the cleansing, but will it be enough? Later that night, once everyone else had returned home, she is brought to tears. Cody seems to be back to his old self. He's spending time with his father, having a story read to him from a book in his room before bed. Over the next 3 months, all is calm and well. Cody seems to be more responsive. He's much happier, and most importantly, there is no mention of any kind of an imaginary friend. That was until one afternoon. In Jan's own words, "Cody wasn't totally back, but we were certainly making great strides. All seemed to be well, and then out of nowhere, 3 months after the ritual, he began speaking to man again. When I heard him, I could not move. I was in so much fear. He kept talking for a while, and then all of a sudden, he went quiet. When I went into his room, he was holding something in his hands. It was a photograph. I said, 'Where did you get this?' I then reached down to grab it, and he went berserk. Cody screamed and clawed at her. His screams and yells seemed to be layered, as if two voices were speaking through him simultaneously. As Jan examined the photo, it appeared to be an older Polaroid, possibly from the late 50s or early 60s. There was an elderly woman, perhaps a grandmother, and next to her was a small boy. As her son relents, she asked him, just who was this a picture of? And he responded with, "Man." Shocked at what she was both looking at as well as hearing, Jan then asked Cody, "Where did you get this picture?" He proceeds to tell her that man gave it to him. This causes her to burst into tears. The ritual, which had seemed to work for a good portion of time, didn't seem to get rid of the entity. She now wonders what will happen now. What are the next steps that she can take for herself and her family? The following day, as Jan arrives back home from work, she walks into chaos. Cody is screaming and berating the nanny. He's thrown his food onto the floor. She immediately goes to reprimand her son and is surprised by what he does. With one hand, he shoves her, and he does so with so much force that she falls down into the wall behind her. Cody then screams at her, "Man said I didn't have to listen to any of you anymore." And then he runs out of the room. Stunned by both her son's strength and behavior, she gets back up off the ground, now to see the nanny packing her things. She had decided that she couldn't deal with the child anymore. She suggests getting him some counseling, and although Jan tries her absolute best to keep her employed, she leaves. Later that night, Jan tries to keep herself together as the family sits down to eat dinner. In her own words, "I was trying to keep things together. I needed to be an employee, a mother, and a wife. I was also the one bearing the brunt of my son's abuse. But by now, there was no love coming from Cody. No hugs, kisses, or real interactions. Just pure hatred. He was a total stranger to me at this point, and I didn't know how to handle this." She begins to believe that something far more sinister than a little boy is manipulating her son. She's unsure of exactly what it is, but she knows deep down that it's evil. After losing the nanny, Jan and Dale have to start taking Cody to a cousin's house to be watched during the day, so the two could work to support the family. After dropping Cody off for the first time at the cousin's house, Jan then heads to work like normal. Several hours into her workday, as she loads packages onto a mail truck, she is told she has an urgent phone call. It's from her cousin. In her own words, "When I picked up the phone, she was incoherent. She was crying and kept repeating that I had to come get Cody now, that she could not watch him anymore." Rushing from work to her cousin's house, Jan has no idea what could have happened, but is quickly about to find out. She arrives and runs up to the door and is greeted by her cousin, holding Cody by the arm. She is then told what had happened. When Cody and her daughter were playing in the living room while she cleaned in the kitchen, she listened to make sure that everything was okay. She began to hear another voice, a third voice, one that was deeper, like that of a grown man. Concerned, but still trying to decipher what was happening, the air was then filled with the screams of her daughter. Running to the living room, she then saw Cody standing across from her daughter, with multiple toys floating in the air around them. Upon seeing the scene, she covered her mouth trying not to scream, as the toys fell one by one and hit the ground. She told Jan that she was afraid of Cody, and that not only could she not watch him anymore, but that her daughter was not allowed to play with him either. It's a somber drive back home. Jan knows that she has to have someone watch Cody during the day because she can't afford to lose her job. Once the two arrive, she grabs the phone book and frantically begins calling daycares, trying to find a reputable place that will take him. Finally finding one after a few phone calls, she sighs with relief. After hanging up the phone, she sits at the table with her son. She tells him that he is in no circumstances allowed to take man with him anywhere, but especially to his new daycare. Surprisingly, the child agrees not to. For the next week, all seems well during the day, with Cody at daycare and his parents working their jobs. But at night, the entity known as man waits for him to return. One evening, as Dale goes to Cody's room to get him for supper, he finds his son cutting up stuffed animals. Although the incident disturbs him, he doesn't blame it on anything paranormal. He sits Cody in the living room and discusses the matter with his wife in the adjacent kitchen. In the meantime, Cody had other plans. As Dale describes, that man told their son that it was okay for him to cut up his toys to Jan. The two suddenly stop when they hear the muffled screams of the family cat. Pamela, heading out of her bedroom, then confronts her younger brother. She yells at him and pushes him off the couch. There, underneath where he had been sitting, he had trapped the cat with a cushion and a pillow, seemingly trying to suffocate it. As Pamela tends to the poor animal, Jan and Dale rush into the room, and they see a sinister grin upon Cody's face. Horrified, the couple realize that they can't pretend to be rational anymore. Whatever that's happening to their son was serious, but they were unsure of just how to tackle the situation. The following morning, as Jan goes to grab clothes from Cody's closet to get him ready for daycare, she notices that his clothes are damp. And that wouldn't be all. His toys and bed were wet as well. She would discover that her son had been urinating all over his things, inside and outside of his closet. Further disturbed, she then confronts him, and he says that man told him it was okay, and that he didn't have to listen to her anymore. He then begins hitting her and lashing out, which only causes her more emotional torment. In her own words, everything started happening at such a fast pace. The behavior, the urinating, trying to kill the kitten. I just wanted my son back, and I felt as if he was being controlled by some kind of monster. One cold night, as wind whips the windows of the house, the Fosters are surprised by a visitor in their room in the middle of the night. It's Cody. He's calling out to them for the first time in a very long time. He said that his bed was shaking and that he needed his mama. At this moment, Jan saw the glimpse of the boy she hadn't seen in over a year. As she holds her child for the first time in what feels like an eternity, she knows that man is not with him. She also is reminded why she must keep fighting for her boy. That ultimately, she must confront this entity. Waiting until Cody was fast asleep in their bed with Dale, Jan quietly gets out of bed and heads down the hallway and towards Cody's room by herself. With every step she takes, she's silently praying to God to give her the strength to confront whatever this creature is that has a grip on her family. Finally making it to the threshold of the room, she takes a deep breath and enters. Glancing around the room, she sees nothing. Wanting to put herself in the shoes of her son, she lays down where he would normally sleep in his bed, hoping that if she persists enough, that man would possibly try to communicate with her. She lays there for several minutes, but nothing happens. She then sees who she believes to be her son in the doorway. Calling out to him, he comes to her and embraces her. However, Jan soon senses that something is horribly wrong. The embrace feels all wrong. His hands are ice cold, and then suddenly, she realizes that this isn't her son at all. As she pushes the figure back, it begins to grow. It soon towers over her. Its skin is pale, and its eyes a deep blood red. Its teeth are gnarled and rotten. It pushes her down onto the bed and begins laughing in a deep, demonic tone. In Jan's own words, he started laughing very demonically when this sudden realization came over me. This was man. Screaming for her life, the apparition disappears in the blink of an eye as soon as her family rushes into Cody's room to figure out just what was going on. Dale then holds his wife as she sobs uncontrollably. Once she finally regains her bearings, Jan calms the rest of the family down enough to get them all back into bed for the night. She, however, is unable to sleep. Heading to the living room, contemplating just what exactly to do about this grievous revelation, she begins begging God for guidance. In her own words yet again, "I was frightened beyond means, but another part of me, once the adrenaline started surging, knew that I had to face this. I had to do something to protect my family, and to protect Cody, and to keep this entity from taking him any further." Jan considers many things, including packing up her family to move, but she thinks that man is certainly attached to her son, that it wouldn't do any good. She doesn't sleep through the rest of the night. The following morning, as everyone else heads out to start their day, she takes Cody to daycare, as is the normal routine. But instead of heading to work herself, she heads back home and makes an urgent phone call. She calls her friend, who is a Native American medicine man. By this time, she hasn't spoken to him in about a year since everything started. Thankfully, he picks up on the other end. She explains everything that has been transpiring, and that she's seen the entity with her own eyes, that she believes it to be some kind of demon, that this abhorrent entity had been masquerading as a little boy to gain entry into her son's life. The shaman explains that he now understands why the initial cleansing didn't work. He believed that the intent was not specific enough, since they believed that they were revoking an invitation of a little boy and not something darker. He then tells her that she will have to bless the house again, only this time she must focus with all of her strength on ridding the home of this evil spirit. Jan wonders if she's strong enough to be able to accomplish this alone. In her own words, "I didn't know if I was going to be able to do this myself. I'm just a mom. I'm not a priest, albeit I have a spiritual side, but I was willing to give it my all to defend myself and my family." The shaman tells her that she must do this and must be brave and forceful with her intent to banish this demon, that she must not show any doubt in her efforts. With these parting words, Jan braces herself and then gets to work performing a second ritual. Starting on the four corners of the property, she creates a barrier using olive oil. She then enters a state of constant prayer while she sages around her property, slowly working her way inside. This time, instead of feeling weak, she begins to feel an inner strength, as if someone or something was standing beside her during her prayers. As she enters her home, she notices that the temperature of the house is abnormally cold, frigid, to the point to where she can see her breath hang in the air as it fills with sage smoke. She knows there is a presence that resides within its walls. Feeling as if she's being watched, she continues to pray and smudge the home, going from room to room. As she does this, the walls and windows begin to shake, yet her prayers are uninterrupted. She knows that man is watching her and trying to break her concentration. As the activity reaches a fever pitch, so do her prayers. She is yelling now and calling upon God to banish the entity known as man from her home and from all of their lives. It is here that suddenly and violently all of the doors within the house open, and an unearthly scream echoes all throughout the house. Then, as quickly as the doors opened, they suddenly all slammed closed. Breathing heavily, Jan immediately notices that the feeling within the home is like night turning to day. In her own words, it was as if a veil had lifted, a dark veil of pain and confusion. I noticed the trees, and I could hear the birds. I was back to a normal reality. Following this intense cleansing, the entity known as man has yet to return. In due time, the foster family seemed to go back to normal. Cody in particular ceased the horrendous behavior and was no longer influenced by the darkness of the demonic. However, this wasn't the end to the strange paranormal manifestations they would all experience. They continued to hear noises they couldn't explain and feel as if unseen eyes were watching them at all times. Was this the demon known as man slithering around them, watching and waiting to devour their very souls? This case has been requested numerous times for me to cover, and I'm glad to have finally given it its time of day. It's certainly a terrifying and very intriguing one, to say the least. The names within the case were changed to protect the anonymity of the family who was involved. Therefore, updates, as hard as I looked, are unavailable. I can only hope that the foster family, or whoever they may be, are good and safe today. That Cody and Pamela have grown up to be decent, functioning people, and I truly wish them all the best. With that being said, I do have several questions and statements I'd like to share with you now. These are my thoughts on the case as a whole. First of all, just how did man enter Cody's life? Was it a demon that was stalking or haunting the land itself? Was it picked up somewhere else and then brought back with the child? It obviously posed itself as a child in order to gain Cody's trust to begin with. This reminds me a lot of the Sally House case, which I just covered several weeks ago now, and it goes to show that the demonic has no qualms about masquerading itself as the ultimate innocence in order to prey upon us. Do you think the native banishing was sufficient, or do you think a Catholic priest should have been involved? I'm always curious to hear people's feedback on situations like this, because I have personally seen a banishing happen in real time using sage, but the entity was just forced outside of the house. It continued to try to get back in. But if cleansing using sage on the property as a whole as well as the house was done, maybe it would have forced the spirit out entirely. Considering Jan used Christian prayer alongside sage and sweetgrass smudging, it certainly makes for a very interesting hybrid cleansing that, in my opinion, would have worked if her faith was strong enough. If man gave Cody an old Polaroid of who he supposedly was in life, as the one shown to Jan by Cody with the little boy and the elderly lady, just where did this picture come from? And who did it end up being? Did it come from inside the house or somewhere else? And lastly, as to not pose too many questions, if the family continued to experience paranormal happenings, such as unexplained noises and the feelings of being watched, was man ever truly banished, or just weakened by Jan's cleansing efforts? Or, if man was banished, did perhaps something else happen on the land where the home now sits that could have potentially scarred it, such as a tragic event? And with this being said, could there possibly be a portal on the land, or now within the house itself, one where the veil between our world and the next is much thinner, allowing entities, especially dark ones, to sneak through? Ultimately, your conclusions are up to you. When a young family seeking a bright future moves into a new house, it seems as if their dreams have come true until a malevolent force makes itself known. Tormented visions and violent attacks leave them all questioning just what insidious force slithers behind the walls of their new home. Will they make it out alive, or will the entity known as Sally keep them as playmates forever? This is a case I have personal experience with, and it certainly is very unnerving. I wouldn't recommend watching this video in the dark unless you like a challenge. Located in northeast Kansas is a town known as Atchison, situated on the bluffs of the Missouri River and offering sweeping views of the river valley beyond. Grand Victorian homes and cobblestone roads recall glorious days when wealthy lumber merchants and railroad magnates once occupied the town. But as one walks the streets today, they can't help but feel a tingle down their spine and a cold shudder in their soul. It seems to be a kind of hotspot that harbors otherworldly forces. The time is March of 1993. Newly married couple Tony and Deborah Pickman begin renting a house in Atchison. After weeks of unboxing their belongings, their new house is finally starting to feel like a home. In the words of Tony Pickman, "We had finally moved into a new place. My wife was expecting, and we were just very much looking forward to starting a family together. It was a good time for us." And with Deborah Pickman later saying that, "We thought the home was perfect for us. It was spacious, it had several bedrooms, and we just knew that it was the perfect house." But what they failed to realize was that this house was far from perfect for anyone. After about a month of living there, strange things began to occur. First, the TV began to turn on and off by itself, and small objects like their keys began to move on their own. Thinking that perhaps they were misremembering where they had placed their keys, and the TV turning on and off was possibly faulty wiring, they contacted their landlord about the matter. But after having an electrician come out, he would find nothing wrong with the wiring. Although old, it was functioning as intended. Although the Pickmans thought the happenings were strange, they simply overlooked them. Later that summer, Deborah would give birth to a baby boy who they would name Taylor. And when the young family comes back home from the hospital, Deborah's sister Karen flies in from Buffalo, New York, to help her sister get some much-needed rest as she begins to heal from giving birth and starts adjusting to taking care of a newborn. Although the help is greatly appreciated, it seems to pass quickly. Although the Pickmans are still adjusting to the late-night cries of their newborn son, his cries seem to wake up more than just his parents. One afternoon, while Tony hangs pictures upstairs, he sees a shadow move out of the corner of his eye. He then hears the giggle of a little girl. Finding this odd, he glances around his general area, and it's here that he discovers something even stranger. There in his son's nursery on the floor is all of Taylor's stuffed animals, neatly arranged in a circle. Thinking this was bizarre, they ultimately would laugh it off, thinking that perhaps someone they knew had come into the home and played a prank on them, that perhaps they didn't notice it until now. They thought that maybe Tony's brother Alan, who was a known prankster, was to blame. Laughing it off, they went back to what they had been doing previously. It wasn't until a few minutes later that Deborah would walk back by the nursery and notice the exact same thing had occurred again. All of her son's stuffed toys were arranged in a circle, and all facing outward, yet again on the floor. Now, unsure of what was causing these strange happenings, they checked all their windows and doors. They were all locked. If it was Tony's brother Alan, they don't know how he would have been getting in and out without any of them noticing, and within a matter of minutes. The following morning, Tony had his brother come over to their house. It's important to note that Alan did live next door to the Pickmans at this time. Once they had all gotten settled on the couches in the living room, Tony began to ask, "So Alan, just how did you get in and out of our house last night without any of us noticing?" It was in this moment that Tony began to worry. Although he and his brother had always played tricks on one another, his brother wasn't known to be a liar. Alan looked back at him genuinely confused. He told Tony that he had no idea what he was talking about, that he wasn't even home last night. Finding an opportunity for a laugh, however, Alan then starts asking Tony if he thinks that he has a ghost. He then takes his brother's camera and starts snapping photos around the house while asking, "Is there a presence here with us? And if so, make the stuffed animals move again. Do something." As Tony and Deborah follow Alan, the three are then left in utter shock as a stuffed bear sitting on a nearby small chair is suddenly thrown onto the floor by something they can't see. Taking what they had just seen as some kind of a warning, Tony, Deborah, and Alan take baby Taylor and rush outside into the family's vehicle. As the baby cries, as Tony buckles him into the car seat, Tony cries as well, but out of pain. He suddenly feels a sharp, stinging sensation coming from his back. Thinking it was a bee sting or a spider bite, he finishes buckling the baby in and then closes the door. He figures he'll check it out later. Alan then heads back to his house next door, and Debbie and Tony with their baby drive across town to Tony's parents' house. After arriving, the stinging sensation on Tony's back has only grown more noticeable. Again, thinking it was a bee sting or a spider bite, he finally has his wife take a look at it. Upon lifting up his shirt, she starts to freak out. From Tony's lower back to up by his shoulder blades are what appear to be 3 very distinct and fresh claw marks. Her anxiety is soon felt by everyone in the house. After discussing what had been occurring amongst themselves, the Pickmans now think that what they could be experiencing may be evil. Coming to this conclusion leaves their heads spiraling, making them ponder a number of questions. Just what will they do? Will they go back to the house? Where could they go if they don't? And much more. Together, Debbie and Tony do their best to calm down and to face the decision that they have to make head on as a couple. In Tony's words, "We were newly married. We had just started a family. We didn't have the money or the resources to be able to afford to move again. We were essentially bled out. We had a baby and we needed a place to stay. So we decided to go back that night." Although incredibly apprehensive about doing so, the Pickmans seemingly have no other choice. The following day, Tony meets up with his brother Alan yet again. Alan seems to have an idea on how to tackle the situation. Alan tells Debbie and Tony that his boss's sister is a psychic medium, and he thinks that they should invite her to try and figure out what could be residing within the house, and if she's able to decipher that. Finding this proposal weird because they've never delved into anything like this before, but feeling like it couldn't hurt to give it a try, they agree to have Alan reach out and ask her to come to the house. 3 days later, she would arrive. Her name was Barbara. Originally based out of California, she actively engaged in psychic work and lectured at various universities about parapsychology. Not having been given any information about the house or its history, she sat in the living room and explained to the Pickmans what it was that she did, and then asked them to tell her everything that had occurred up until that point so that she could fully grasp the whole picture. After they went through it all with Barbara, she then asked them to visit the nursery to begin. Tony would later say that, "I don't really believe in psychics, so I kind of blew her off at first. I didn't know what to think." Barbara begins her process and quickly begins to lose her breath. She starts choking and coughing. She then flees the room, heading for the basement below. Tony later would say that, "She told us that whatever was here didn't want us here, and that it doesn't like anyone in this room, referring to the nursery. As the Pickmans follow Barbara down the stairs, she soon stops at the bottom of them and begins to sense another spirit, but this one doesn't seem ominous. She discovers that the spirit is that of a 7-year-old little girl named Sally. She believes Sally passed away within the home itself. She also would come to the conclusion that it was Sally who had attacked Tony, believing that baby Taylor was hers to protect. She had become territorial. Between Deborah and Barbara, they come to the consensus that Sally is a guardian of sorts, that it would be a good idea to set aside a space for her and to give her some toys of her own to appease her. Tony, however, thought that this wasn't a good idea at all. He still believed that whatever dwelled within their house was malevolent and evil, that it was a bad idea for them to interact with whatever this thing was in any way, shape, or form. However, disregarding her husband, Deborah does exactly this. After the psychic departs, several days later, Deborah would go shopping for toys for Sally, hoping that her offerings would appease the spirit and all would be well. She also picks up the developed film from the photos that Tony took during the psychic's visit. Excited to see if any of them contained an image of Sally, she quickly opens up the envelope to look at them. What she sees, however, disturbs her. Several of the photos are bizarrely distorted, and one even contains some kind of malignant-looking black blob. Horrified, Deborah rushes back home with the photos and the toys in hand. Walking through the front door, she immediately shows Tony. Having been the one who took the photos, he doesn't know what to make of the anomalies. One photo in particular catches his attention. In his own words, "The picture that really got me as we were walking down the stairs with Barbara. I turned around and took a picture, and floating midair is this thing. I couldn't explain it. It made me scared." Following looking at the photos, Deb once again references Barbara's convictions and continues to believe that Sally is a protector. She then continues with her plan and makes a dedicated space for Sally and adds the toys to it. Although Tony believes that the force haunting their home is evil, things do seem to go dormant for a short period of time following the offerings to Sally. However, this peace would not last. Several weeks later, Deb's sister Karen would return again for a follow-up visit, and this time along with her husband. As the couples catch up on what's been happening in their lives, Deborah and Tony walk into the kitchen and grab themselves and their guests some more food and drinks. Their nice evening is soon interrupted by a piercing scream. There before Karen and her husband, a stuffed animal, the same one that had fallen before, that was sitting in one of the chairs, had suddenly and spontaneously caught fire before their very eyes. As Tony and Deborah rush back into the living room, they too were left flabbergasted at the sight. Tony then rushes in with a towel to extinguish the fire. In his own words, "If it can do this, what's keeping it from setting one of us on fire, or hurting us, or harming the baby?" Following the flames of the previous evening, Deborah tries to convince her husband that the fire was an isolated incident, and for the next 2 weeks, things at the house remain eerily calm. Tony, who works the overnight graveyard shift at a nearby grain elevator, adjusts his day to his schedule. Upon returning home from work in the early morning hours, he tends to eat a meal when he gets home. One particular morning, following the calmness within the home, he grabs himself a glass of juice and something to eat. As he goes to place the pitcher of juice back in the refrigerator, he sees something move out of the corner of his eye. Turning his head, pitcher still in hand, he sees the apparition of a young girl before him. Shocked, he drops the pitcher of juice, and it shatters on the floor. almost as soon as the pitcher had broke, as it smashed into the floor below. The apparition vanished. Paying no mind to it, Tony quickly runs upstairs where he greets his wife in their bedroom. Barely able to get a word out, he's finally able to say to her, "I just saw Sally." Intrigued, Deborah immediately asks just what she looked like, and then proceeds to bombard him with many more questions. Rather than being scared, Deb is elated. She's more curious than ever before. In her own words, "I was terribly jealous. Tony got to see this little girl, or the apparition of her. She's curious just why, of all people, Sally would reveal herself to Tony. She wonders why she didn't reveal herself to her." For the next 2 months, things once again go dormant within the home. But this too wouldn't last. One night, as the moon hangs high above the Pickman residence, as the couple sleeps, Tony is suddenly and violently pulled forward and then up and out of his bed by his arms. Absolutely petrified, Tony screams as he realizes just what has taken place. He then is further bewildered as he looks down at his wrists. There on both of them were 5 distinct finger markings, as if someone or something had grabbed him. But the outline themselves weren't just there. These outlines looked like they were burns, as if the fingers themselves had been seared into his flesh. Blisters were now starting to form where each invisible hand had been. As he tries to come to terms with this terrifying ordeal, Deb still refuses to believe that it has anything to do with Sally. She thinks that his lack of sleep from being a new father and working the overnight shift have started to get to him. However, upon seeing the blisters, she's almost in a sense of denial, saying that surely the spirit of a 7-year-old girl would not be able to pull a grown man out of a bed or leave such marks. But if she somehow did, what was the message that she was trying to convey? Given everything that had taken place, a resentment began to build within Tony towards his wife. Accompanying this, he began to hear whispers on almost a daily basis. This would typically occur when he would lay down during the day to try and sleep, so he could get back up and work at the grain elevator. To him, the whispers did not sound like that of a child at all, but rather like 3 low-voiced people speaking to one another. They would also seem so close, as if they were talking simultaneously, directly into his ears. During one particularly scary experience involving the whispering, Tony also begins to see items near the bed float and rotate by themselves, as if suspended by an invisible force. As he screams, wanting all of it to stop, he is greeted by his wife. After explaining what he had just experienced, unfortunately, she doesn't believe him, given what he had been saying, that he had been seeing shadowy figures, hearing whispers, having nightmares as she perceived them. She thought that lack of sleep and stress was causing him to make things up. Tony is starting to believe that whatever force that haunts the house is targeting him, that it's attempting to manipulate his feelings. Coming to terms with this, he also realizes just how hard it's becoming to hide his growing resentment towards Deborah. He keeps having feelings of a dark rage well up inside him, feelings that he's worried could turn violent. In his own words, "These feelings were not like me. I love her so much, and I would never do anything to hurt her. But the longer we were there, the stronger these feelings were becoming." Tony, of course, wasn't the only one to notice these changes. Deborah noticed them too. There had been a large shift in his demeanor and attitude. He seemed angry, short-fused, and argumentative. The couple began to fight almost daily, which hadn't been like them at all in the past. The Pickmans decide that they want to reach back out to Barbara for another consultation to see if they could potentially gain any new information on the presence that seemed to be everywhere and yet nowhere at the same time. In due time, Barbara again would visit them, and upon her arrival, would be told just how things had developed. She attempts to contact Sally once again. After she believes she's made contact with her, she then begins to sense a second entity. This one, however, is much older and seems to refuse to interact with her. She believes that this adult entity is a female and the one that has been targeting Tony, and that Sally has been taking the blame. However, she comes to the conviction that whatever is happening within the home is beyond her expertise. What she does offer, though, is that she would contact a very qualified group of paranormal investigators. Tony's reaction at first is harsh, and in his own words once again, "At first I was like, no way. We live in a small town. We'd be the laughing stock. If it wasn't a spirit in the house, then the only other thing that I could think it could be was the devil, and that scared me to death." After discussing the matter further with his wife and Barbara, he finally agrees to give the group a try. Within days, the paranormal group would arrive. The group is led by, at that time, world-renowned medium and paranormal researcher Peter James. In his words, "A ghost is the ethereal double of its physical counterpart. We become a ghost dependent on the circumstances in which we die. If we die untimely, tragically, or violently, then we are rendered a ghost. I prefer not knowing any details about any specific haunting in which I investigate. It's my job to identify what's causing the activity." Not being informed of the information previously, only that the family was young and had a young boy, as he sits in the living room and speaks with the Pickmans, he asks them if they had a young daughter as well, perhaps of 7 or 8 years old. Telling him no, Peter remarked that it was strange because when he arrived, he saw such a young girl staring at them from one of the upstairs windows. Starting to explore the home, Peter begins to sense that there are 2 entities. One that is a child, and the other, an older adult woman who is very powerful. Upon asking the name of the entities out loud, he would reply with, "Sally, it's good to meet you." As he embarks up the stairs, he makes his way into the Pickman's master bedroom and starts feeling the presence of the older female. As he steps further into the room, with his crew and the Pickmans behind him, Peter is suddenly thrown back against the door, and almost simultaneously, Tony begins to scream in pain. "My back," he says. Debbie lifts up his shirt and sees that once again, his back is covered in fresh scratches, deep ones, to the point to where they drew blood. Peter is astonished. He now knows that his older woman's presence is not a positive one, telling everyone not to let the entity know that they are afraid of it. They reluctantly press on. The crew spends the rest of the day investigating the home, and during this time, Peter once again begins walking back upstairs, as if something or someone was calling out to him, and it's here that he begins to have a vision. In his vision, he's taken back into the past, and he begins to see the spirits as they were in life. He believed that the home was once the home and practice of a medical physician. His housekeeper and her daughter lived there with him as well. The housekeeper was also his mistress, and the daughter was also his. The housekeeper was African American, and their daughter half. And in such racially divided times, the affair and their secret child were kept hidden. Sally was her name, and she was their 7-year-old daughter. Peter believed that Sally had contracted pneumonia, and her father, although a doctor, was unable to save her. Although the secret family and Sally's death are tragic, Peter tells the Pickmans that it's not fair for them to be victimized by the dead in their own home, that in order to rid themselves of this torment, that they must cleanse the house, that they were in control, but it was ultimately up to them to restore order. And with these words of advice, he and his crew would depart. The Pickmans decide that they will stay in the house and will do their best to set the rules and stand their ground. Several weeks pass, and despite their best efforts, the atmosphere has only grown heavier, the torment even worse, especially for Tony. His sleep has become even more scarce, and his thoughts grow more and more evil. He can't shake the angry feelings and is becoming more worried that he may end up harming his wife and or himself, that he feels as if this darkness is slowly consuming him. He finally confronts Deborah and explains exactly how he feels, that he believes that if they don't leave the house, that something horrible may end up happening. Finally understanding the pressure her husband was under, she agrees with him and begins looking at ads for a new home for the family. In the meantime, Tony attempts to sleep due to working the graveyard shift. As he lays in bed, tossing and turning, he is once again consumed by the ever-growing and almost overwhelming thoughts of wanting to harm his family. Feeling as if he was under attack, he rushes out of the room and yells for Deborah. He tells her to grab Taylor, that they were leaving, that he had finally reached his breaking point. Fortunately for the Pickman family, they find a house shortly after leaving what would become known as the Sally House. The heaviness, the anger, and the spiritual torment would cease. But given what the Pickmans had gone through, it's also important to note that the Sally House certainly has a dark and checkered history that existed long before their arrival. Originally built in 1867 by the Finney family, it served as a generational home. Several generations of the family lived there between 1867 and 1939. During that time, 5 confirmed deaths occurred within the family. Michael Finney in 1872, Charles, Catherine's father, the wife of Michael Finney, Kate Finney, and Richard Finney in 1874, and finally Agnes Finney in 1939. There are multiple stories about Sally, that she passed away from pneumonia, the origin I previously told in this story. But there is also another which I will tell you now. The story goes that Charles Finney, the son of Michael and Kate, became a doctor and made the house both his residence and his practice. The front served as an office space and an examination room, while the family lived upstairs. One day, a frantic mother arrived carrying her 6-year-old daughter, Sally, who had collapsed from severe abdominal pain. The doctor quickly diagnosed her with an appendicitis, and new surgery was urgent. Without delay, he prepped Sally for the operation using ether, the anesthesia that was available at that time. Tragically, Sally wasn't fully unconscious, and as the first incision was made, she screamed and thrashed in pain. Despite the doctor's efforts to restrain her and administer more anesthesia, Sally's condition worsened. She would go into shock and ultimately die on the operating table. Her final moments filled with agony and fear. The home left the Finney family in 1939 and passed through various owners before becoming a rental property. At least one tenant may have been involved in satanic rituals, which some believe contributed to the sinister activity associated with the house. Paranormal activity wasn't reported until Tony and Deborah Pickman began renting the house. Intrigued by the paranormal claims, the property owner Les Smith investigated and discovered a pentagram beneath the basement floorboards. Many believe that this may have been evidence of rituals that summoned something demonic. Subsequent investigations revealed blood evidence in the master bedroom closet and tattered clothing in the attic. After the pigments, however, reports of electronic malfunctions, EVPs, physical attacks, and other poltergeist activity have further cemented the house's reputation as a hotspot for paranormal occurrences. I've visited the Sally house myself. It was actually my very first paranormal investigation, albeit amateur at best at that time. It certainly was an excellent experience getting into the field, and although for a variety of reasons, I don't think the Sally house is as haunted as it once was. However, we did experience a few strange things. When I went with a few friends of mine, we arrived in the summer of 2022, and it was easily close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and the home, being very old, didn't have great AC, as we would later learn. However, when we stepped inside for the first time, we were taken aback because it was absolutely frigid by comparison, but this blast of cold air only lasted several seconds. The temperature did not fluctuate like it had then for the rest of the night. I also remember personally checking the thermostat, and it was set at like 85 or something crazy, so the actual air conditioning wasn't even on until we turned it on. So I found that weird, to say the least. The record player and TV turned on by themselves multiple times throughout the night, which, of course, we found odd. The old record player didn't have any sort of a timer whatsoever, and given the age of the CRTV as well, it didn't appear to have a timer that we could find that would have caused this. Besides some strange feelings throughout the day and then into the night, we didn't get a ton of interaction. Through the kitchen, although it was blocked off, we decided to look past it and go down the stairs and witness the pentagram, which for one reason or another had been burned out on the floor in the basement. And I do have to say that the basement itself was extremely creepy. You could feel some very bad vibes originating from there. So I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of black magic ritual or rituals were potentially done down there. I almost forgot, but as I was reviewing the original footage, I did find that we did capture an EVP, and I'll go ahead and play that for you now. With black mold in the walls of this very old home, we decided not to stay overnight because you weren't supposed to sleep there anyways. Having taken plenty of video and photo evidence, we began to place things we had taken from Sally's room back. And when my friend, whose name is also Cody, but with a C, placed one of those magic 8-ball toys back on the bed, a touch-activated toy decided to go off on its own. In this particular one, you had to tap its head fairly hard to get it to go off. I remember all of us being freaked out by it. I remember it was extremely foggy that night, which added to the mystique, especially of my first paranormal adventure for sure. Or one that didn't occur, of course, in a home that I lived in. We took one last look at the Sally house before departing, and to our shock, all the lights decided to turn on within the home. From what we could see, both the upstairs and the main floor lights. The breaker was the original, so this too seems rather impossible to have just occurred on its own, without some kind of ghostly intervention. Our code only worked for entering, so we weren't able to get back into the home following this. But granted, it was 2 a.m. at this point, so we decided to drive home. We would hit a pothole, and one of our tires kept going flat on our way home, which definitely was not fun. All around, I would return knowing what I know now and having much better equipment and resources and far more experienced friends by my side. I think we would catch a lot more. It's my belief that for one reason or another that the Sally houses may be dormant or not as haunted as it once was, and that it's still very possible that a demonic presence still slithers within its walls, masquerading itself as the soul of a little girl named Sally. I took the original documentary down due to some copyrighted image issues earlier this year, as well as the origin story that I had originally made. but I think I did a far better job this time anyways. But some of the photos and footage I've shown you while explaining my trip there, I originally took and filmed myself. The Sallie House was made famous in part by the old show Sightings, who filmed a segment for an episode on it, which was picked up by local and then later national media, as well as Deborah Pickman would go on to write a book, which I've found to be a great read, called The Sallie House Haunting, which you can find on Amazon, and I'll link it below. Today we cover a legend, one that whispers of a truly dark and strange place. The story surrounds a group of friends who venture into an abandoned and supposedly haunted town hidden within the misty mountains of Spain. And it's here that they collectively experience something that would make even the bravest of us shudder and would chill every single one of them to their core. Will they make it out alive, or will the mist claim them? If you enjoy haunting and mysterious stories told in a documentary-style format, then welcome to Mystery Archives. With hundreds of episodes available, if this sounds like your kind of content, then please grab a drink and a snack, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe with all notifications turned on. And join me week after week as we explore the unexplained, paranormal tales of this world, and possibly the next. Now, let's get to today's story. It was the afternoon of October 16th, 1991. A 36-year-old man by the name of Enrique Martinez knelt by a moss-covered log. He had been admiring a lovely-looking mushroom. Foraging for fungi, he placed it gently into his wicker basket, adding it to the others that he had gathered. As he stood, he took in the view of the verdant valley below, untouched and silent. Beautiful, yet eerie at the same time. Enrique was mushroom hunting with his wife Anna and two of their friends, a couple by the name of Jorge and Sofia. They were exploring near an ancient abandoned town known as La Mesura, perched high in the northwestern mountains of Spain. It was Jorge who had suggested coming here, lured by legends of hauntings and sinister folklore. Enrique, however, cared little for ghost stories. If anything, he was here for the mushrooms and the peace and quiet. Enrique worked as a bartender in the bustling port city of Tarragona, where every night he was surrounded by crowds. Loud noises and voices, coupled with the clanking of bottles and glasses, was his norm. The peace and solitude of the mountains were a balm for his chaotic life, a chance to immerse himself in the quiet pursuit of mushroom hunting, a hobby he truly enjoyed. His mind focused on finding a prized local mushroom known as the bloody milk cap, didn't dwell on La Mesura's dark history, albeit it may seem ironic given the name. But as they reached the town's outskirts, he felt a shift in energy. A prickling unease crept over him, and he became unnerved to say the least. La Mesura was over 900 years old, its crumbling remnants littering the mountainside, with many ruins older than its memory itself. The town had once been home to around 300 residents, yet now had been deserted for decades, the last souls fleeing some 40 years prior. As they approached the town, the friends paused by a ruin on the town's edge, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the air thickened around them, and an ever-growing mist gathered at their feet. This mist or fog then slowly creeped up the abandoned dirt road that led through La Mesura's heart. At the road's end was a massive, dilapidated church. its presence casting a shadow over the overgrown cemetery behind it, as well as the murky pond brimming with frogs. The eerie silence was only occasionally broken by the distant croaks echoing through the mist. Jorge led the way, a mischievous smile on his face as he grasped Sophia's hand, pulling her toward the church. Enrique and Anna followed, but something made Enrique glance back. The mist had swallowed the ruin behind them entirely, as if they had crossed an unseen threshold. With this, an inexplicable chill ran through him, and the air suddenly became heavy and thick. The mist, Jorge had said, was La Misura's infamous shroud, a fog that enveloped the town night after night. But here it was, smothering them in the daylight, which bothered him. Yet despite this, he brushed it off and followed his friends, though a gnawing sense of impending doom clung to him. They stopped beside a peculiar rectangular stone jutting from the ground. Jorge placed a hand on its surface, his voice low and eager. "This is the sixth stone," he said. "It's one of the oldest relics here. They say it has dark powers." His voice took on a hushed, reverent tone. La Misura, he explained, was once a way station for ancient armies. They believed that the sixth stone held a magic of sorts that was capable of winning battles, but only for a price. Legend claimed that those who touched it risked being pulled into a twisted parallel world, a darkened hellscape that was teeming with demonic entities. As Jorge relayed this, he kept his hand on the stone, grinning as he dared someone else to touch it. Sophia, uneasy, shook her head, but Anna, laughing, stepped forward and placed her hand on the stone. They held their breath, expecting something dreadful to happen, but nothing did. Just then, the frogs by the church erupted in a cacophony, their croaks deafening. Enrique turned toward the sound, peering through the fog at the shadowy outline of the church. For a moment, he caught a glimpse of a dark figure standing in one of the windows, motionless and watching. The image burned into his mind, but yet in a blink, it vanished. Was this figure real, or just a trick of the fog? Perhaps his imagination running wild. Before he could speak, Anna called to him, laughing, "Come on, Enrique, your turn." Her voice jolted him from his thoughts. Pacing himself, yet feeling some kind of pull towards the object, he reached for the sixth stone. The second his fingers touched it, a wave of unnatural cold washed over him. Yet the stone burned beneath his skin. Time seemed to slow, as if something sinister seeped into his mind, something that urged him to keep touching it, to never let it go. In the depths of his mind, a small voice clinging to reason whispered frantically for him to let go. With great effort, he released the stone, his skin tingling as he backed away. His friends were grinning, but Sophia was pale. "Let's leave the stone alone," she said, with her voice trembling. "We are attempting things that we don't understand." Jorge chuckled, trying to brush off her concern, and then led them further into La Misura. As the group ventured deeper, the fog grew denser, smothering the world around them, as though drawing them into its depths. Enrique couldn't shake the lingering dread, the feeling of someone or something watching them. He slowly trailed behind, casting wary glances at the church. As they passed by the pond, the frog's croaking reached an almost unbearable volume, pulsing like a heartbeat. With this, Enrique's gaze drifted involuntarily toward the window where he had originally seen the dark figure. It was empty now, but he noticed something peculiar. He felt a pull, something coaxing him closer, daring him to peer inside. Despite his soul screaming, he obeyed, stepping toward the church, unable to resist the compulsion. With each step, his breath grew more shallow as he leaned closer and closer to the broken window, peering into the darkness within. Inside, shadows pooled in every corner, shrouding the remnants of pews and the pulpit. The frog's croaks continued to swell, reaching an overwhelming crescendo as his gaze locked onto the inky black void just beyond the altar. It felt as if the darkness itself was alive, twitching and writhing, beckoning him closer. Suddenly, a hand gripped his shoulder, jerking him back to reality. Anna was beside him, her face puzzled. "Come on," she said, leading him toward the cemetery. They joined Jorge and Sofia amongst the graves, each stone worn and nameless. Trying to shake off the lingering terror, Enrique turned his focus to the headstones. Anna backed into an old cross, toppling it to the ground with a sickening crack. With the fog ever thickening around them, Enrique swore he heard whispers in the mist. They seemed faint and pleading. He glanced back at the church, still feeling that dark presence there lurking, watching and waiting. Something in La Mesura did not want them to leave. Jorge and Sofia turned toward Anna as they heard the snap of the stone breaking in two. Realizing what had happened, Jorge burst out laughing, teasing her by saying, "Oh boy, now you've upset the evil spirits here. You better put that back together." Anna tried to laugh along, but panic crept in as she attempted to reassemble the gravestone she had accidentally broken. But the stone was beyond repair. Jorge continued to chuckle, while Sofia, standing close beside him, grew uneasy. "Jorge, is this place truly haunted?" she asked. "Like actually haunted?" Her voice hushed with worry. Jorge paused, his laughter fading. "Yeah, I think it really is." And with that, he launched into the legend that haunted La Mesura. In October of 1873, during a fierce civil war in the region of Spain, rival armies used the nearby mountainside caves as makeshift field hospitals. One night, a reverend general named Circos, mortally wounded in battle, was brought into one of these caves. There, surrounded by his closest men, he passed away. His death was kept secret, revealing the loss of their beloved leader would crush the morale of his troops and give the enemy an easy victory. At dawn, Cerso's 6 loyal men carried him silently up to the cemetery in La Mesura and buried him in a shallow grave. Knowing a villager was to be interred in that spot soon, they laid him under a thin layer of dirt, to be hidden by another coffin and marked only by a simple, unnamed headstone with a single horizontal line. Weeks later, 5 enemy soldiers scaled the mountain, unaware of Cirso's death. Convinced he was hiding in La Mesura, they forced their way into homes, demanding the villagers reveal his location. The poor townspeople were terrified. Finally, a weary elderly man stepped forward and revealed Cirsos was buried behind the church. Suspicious, the soldiers forced the townspeople to dig up every grave in the cemetery to prove his death. Amid the chaos, the eerie sound of croaking frogs from a nearby pond grew louder and louder. Frustrated by the deafening noise, the soldiers' leader strode to the pond, firing shots into the water to silence the frogs. But their croaking only intensified. The soldiers finally realized that the only grave left undisturbed was marked by this simple line. The villagers warned them that this grave belonged to a feared witch, but the soldiers didn't care. They forced the villagers to dig it up, and when they opened the coffin, the townspeople gasped in horror. The witch looked as if she had just died, her skin unnervingly smooth, and her eyes wide open, gazing out at them as if in warning. Enraged at not finding Cirsos, the soldiers dragged the witch's body from her coffin, hung her from a tree, and riddled her with bullets until the town fell silent once more. But as soon as they stopped shooting, they noticed that the frogs, which had filled the air with sound, were now silent too. The soldiers, unsettled by the sudden stillness, fled La Misura, leaving the villagers to rebury the dead. When a townsperson climbed into the desecrated grave, they discovered another coffin below, the secret resting place of General Cirsos. The curse of the witch was said to linger over the town ever since, with death, disease, and failed harvests plaguing the town until its last residents finally abandoned it in the 1950s. As Jorge finished, Anna's gaze dropped to the shattered gravestone in her hands. A terrible realization had dawned on her. The headstone she had accidentally knocked over bore a simple, horizontal line. She had inadvertently desecrated the witch's grave. Terrified, she then spotted the perfect bloody milk-cap mushroom at the base of a nearby wall, the very type her husband, Enrique, had been hunting for the entire time the group had been out there. Trying not to focus on what had just occurred, she plucked it and turned to show him, only to find that he was gone. Puzzled, she called out to him, but received no reply. Growing anxious, she turned to Jorge and Sofia, who when asked shrugged, saying that they hadn't seen him. Panicked, Anna sprinted out of the cemetery with Sofia and Jorge trailing behind her. In the dense fog, shadows shifted and eerie silhouettes loomed. But when they got close, they only found empty air. Sofia clung tighter to Jorge, fear building as the fog grew thicker and the croaking of frogs once again swelled around them. Following Anna's cries, Jorge and Sofia finally found her crouched in the churchyard, clutching Enrique's wicker basket, with tears streaking down her face as she whispered, "He's gone." The trio spent the next hour frantically searching La Misura, the fog becoming blinding as darkness fell. When they finally conceded defeat, they would make their way back to civilization and report the disappearance. Following this, a week-long search ensued, but despite the authorities' best efforts, not a trace of Enrique was ever found. Months later, In January of 1992, Anna, still grieving her husband's disappearance, would return to La Mesura along with Sofia and Jorge, determined to search once more. As the group passed by the old church window, they would be shocked by what they would see. There, within the church, they saw 6 dark hooded figures standing in a circle inside, motionless and silent. Anna's fear and sorrow seemed to turn to anger, mistaking the figures for ghost hunters, disrespecting the tragedy of her husband's disappearance. She approached the window, ready to scream at them. But as she approached, one of the robed figures slowly turned to face her. And when this occurred, it disturbed the poor woman in the very depths of her mourning soul. Anna stumbled backward. The figure who had turned towards her revealed that it had no face. Instead, only a swirling, inky black void staring into her eyes. Before the group could react, the silence would be shattered by the sound of galloping hooves erupting from behind them. This was then followed by a cacophony of frog croaks that grew impossibly loud. Spinning around, they saw only morphing fog. Paralyzed with fear, they would turn back towards the church, only to realize that the sinister robed figures had vanished. The 3 friends could no longer stand being anywhere near this horrible place any longer. In terror, they fled, never to return. To this day, no one knows what became of Enrique, or why others too have vanished in La Mesura, a ghost town that is seemingly cursed by a tumultuous past. But are these terrifying legends true? I originally came across an article about La Mesura and found the main story, which I have now researched and retold. And this article, originally in Spanish, touched upon some very interesting details of the case and added a few hypotheticals, which I'll discuss with you now. One of the beliefs as to what happened to this man was that he chose this moment as an opportunity to voluntarily disappear for one reason or another. I, however, don't personally agree with this theory. Disappearing of your own volition without a trace is very difficult to do, even back in the early 1990s, let alone today. But it is still possible if someone knew what they were doing. But to do so, you'd need a good amount of money and some kind of infrastructure or plan to do it. With this being said, other theories are that he possibly got confused and went off the trail and died by accident, perhaps by falling. Although this seems like a much more plausible potential cause for the man's disappearance, it too to me is pretty unlikely to be what happened. I say this because there was a week-long exhaustive search that was carried out, both with volunteers and the authorities. If Enrique had fallen and passed, surely his body would have been discovered during this time. While the search was taking place, when the authorities began to go through all possibilities, his wife and friends were questioned as to what happened to him, but would be ruled out as not having anything to do with his disappearance. Some other interesting details would be that if he had disappeared in any capacity on his own, he had left his vehicle, which also contained his medications and his identifying documents. Strangely, apparently Enrique has not been the only one to disappear here. Many others have said to have vanished without a trace. Yet despite this, oddly, the missing tend to be referred to in the plural, but oftentimes no specific names are mentioned. What I do know is that in 1995, a German engineer decided to visit La Misura and ultimately went missing for 3 hours. He returned upset and disoriented, completely unable to explain where he had been and just what had happened to him. Various mayors and community leaders in nearby towns have said that these stories are nothing but fairy tales. But this seems to have been said in hopes of quelling fears in order to not disrupt the crucial tourism to the area. The issue of missing persons has no political ideology, yet these things are usually only briefly covered by the mainstream media outlets and local news. Occasionally, a case may be picked up by a content creator on YouTube for wider exposure, but these are few and far between. At the end of the day, only friends and families of the missing person are truly affected, it seems like. Society as a whole may pause for a brief second, but seem to go back to business as usual after that second has passed. To keep things relevant to this story, in November of 2019, over 12,000 people were missing in Spain alone. Some have turned up over time, but the number who haven't is still very high, posing a very real enigma and one that affects many lives. Alongside these fear-inducing statistics, just what has happened to these people? What happened to Enrique? And is there truly something otherworldly, possibly a portal to another dimension, located at the abandoned ghost town known as La Misura? These, as with many stories I've covered, are questions that I or anyone else may never have the answers to. But despite the horror, sorrow, and terror, it does go to show that there are many things in this world that are truly unexplained, and these things may just remain as such.
Things were so bad that Michael's parents, Jackie and Esther, and his sister Martha, had to leave the house along with Martha's baby daughter, Sarah Louise.
It happened about 100 years ago. It was a baby boy that was smothered at birth. And she said this baby was just a newborn baby.
Can we just get that clear, Michael? Did you see it?
Yes.
You saw it?
I did see it, yes.
Galway, a city on Ireland's west coast, sits where the River Corrib meets the Atlantic Ocean. The city's hub is an 18th century Irish square, a popular meeting spot surrounded by shops and traditional pubs that offer live Irish folk music. But Galway is known for much more than just beauty and entertainment. Like many places, it harbors dark and mysterious secrets. Underneath the bustle of feet walking and music playing, if you listen hard enough, you can hear the faint whispers of the dead. Our story begins here in 1996 with the Fahey family. The last 30 years, they've called this council house home. Living as one big happy family all together, there's Jackie Fahey, a bus driver for special needs children. His wife, Esther, who works as a cook at a nearby child care center. And they are joined by their daughter, Martha, who has recently given birth to a baby girl by the name of Sarah Louise, and their son, Michael, with his fiancée, Anne. In the words of Michael Fahey, with the birth of Sarah Louise, when she came into the house, we felt as if it was a new beginning. Me and Anne were in the process of getting married, and I had just started my own business. It was a very happy time for the family. But as the family loves one another and cares for the newborn Sarah Louise, something else seemed to be watching them. lurking within the walls of their home. A few months after Sarah Louise is born, their next-door neighbors begin a series of renovations. The construction and its noises begin to bleed over into their house as well. But it seems as though the baby is not the only entity that is disturbed. Several days after the renovations began, as Michael walks into the living room, he is hit seemingly out of nowhere by a horrendous smell, describing it as smelling like rotten meat or rotting flesh in later interviews, but thinking it had to have been a deceased rodent or something to do with the pipes. He brings it to the attention of his father. Jackie, too, is taken aback by the noxious smell. Although the two do their absolute best to discern where the smell is coming from, it seems to be everywhere, yet is spawning from nowhere. Concerned, Jackie contacts the local property authority to have their pipes examined for the potential cause. The following morning, with a knock at the door, 2 plumbers arrive to hopefully begin to figure out the cause of the smells and come up with a solution for the family. Walking inside, they ask Jackie and Michael just what seems to be the problem, as they explain that the smell seems to be everywhere, yet nowhere, oftentimes being stronger in certain parts of the home versus other times, as if it's moving. They think it could have something to do with the pipes. They tell the men that it smells like rotting flesh, or death, or both. Pinching their noses in disgust, they ask the plumbers if they smell it. Unfazed, neither men can smell anything. This very much confuses the Fahys, telling the men that the scent is often stronger upstairs. They lead them there and into the restroom. Michael and Jackie continue to cringe in discomfort, but the plumbers can't seem to smell what they're smelling. Confused and becoming angry, considering they've been smelling this rot for several days now, they ask the plumbers to check everything anyways, since they're already there. So the men do just that. They examine the toilets, pipes, and drains. However, everything is fine and in working order. Never once did they smell what the Fahys had described. Finding this incredibly odd, and realizing that if they were the only ones smelling whatever this was, the 2 plumbers must have thought that they were crazy. They were now more concerned because if the smell wasn't coming from any place checked by the plumbers, then just where was it coming from? And just what was it? The smell, however, is not just experienced by Jackie and Michael. Over the next several days, it is experienced on varying levels by all members of the family. Feeling as if they were losing their minds, they begin to clean most hours of the day when they are home, and disinfect the sinks and drains regularly. Alongside this, they open the windows for the fresh air, and yet whether they're open or not, whether they are cleaning or not, the smell only continues to get worse. It starts to affect the family, causing them to feel sick, nauseous, and dizzy at varying times. Suffering with the smell for almost a month, one day, it mysteriously vanishes, but something else equally bizarre would take its place. One night, as the moon hangs high and large over the Fahey residence, and the wind rustles the trees outside in the darkness, Michael and his fiancée Anne are woken up by the sounds of a baby crying. This normally wouldn't be a problem, but the crying is persistent and continuing to grow louder with each passing minute. Concerned as to why Martha wasn't taking care of her baby, and irritated, as most would be given the hour, Michael decides to get up and check on just what was going on. Walking down the hall, the cries of the infant seem to grow louder with each step he takes, finally reaching a fever pitch when he reaches the room that Sarah Louise was in. Opening the door to check on her, he sees Sarah fully awake and looking around the room in her crib, but she has a binky in her mouth, and the cries, which he had believed were coming from his niece, were still echoing all throughout and hadn't eased in volume or intensity. Even stranger, his sister Martha was sleeping as if there was nothing out of the ordinary. The cries continued despite Sarah Louise not making them. Thoroughly freaked out but unsure of how to tackle the situation, Michael slowly makes his way back to his bedroom, where Anne asked him just why he didn't get Martha to take care of her baby. He responds with, "I did. I checked on her, and it's not Sarah Louise who's crying, and Martha is asleep." As they both look at each other confused and concerned, Michael suddenly begins to choke. He tries to scream and grabs at his throat, but nothing but struggled gasps of air come out. In later interviews, he would say, "It felt as if someone was choking me and sitting on my chest. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe." Feeling as if he was going to pass out, he makes his way towards the mirror where on the dresser it was connected to, there was a rosary. Reaching desperately for it, he's able to clutch it, just barely, and in this moment, whatever invisible hand that was smothering him pulled away. Terrified as the cries echo all around them, Michael and Anne hold each other with the rosary and pray as hard as they possibly can. In Michael's own words, "As we prayed, the crying seemed to get worse. It got louder and louder, almost as if we were physically hurting the spirits." As the couple continues, the screams go from sounding like those of a young baby to something much scarier. It sounds as if a low-toned person is screaming alongside the baby, as if whatever was mimicking this sound was being harmed by their prayers. They then stopped praying to listen, and suddenly, the crying had vanished. This concludes this utter horror of a night, but little did they know that it would be far from the last that the family would have to endure. The following morning, as Michael and Anne head into the kitchen together, before they have a chance to speak with anyone, they are concerned with Jackie and Esther, frantically searching through the drawers, asking both of them if they had seen the baby's bottles. They answer no. Michael then asked his parents if they had heard the baby crying last night as well. Saying that Sarah Louise was quiet last night, Jackie looks concerned, believing his son to be withdrawn and unlike his normal self. He asks him what he means. Michael answers him with, "There was a baby crying last night, but it wasn't Sarah Louise." Asking what he was talking about because the neighbors don't have any babies, Jackie once again inquires. Michael responds with saying that he believes that there may be something in the house, and whatever this thing was may have just hidden the bottles as well. Jackie and Esther didn't really believe in any sort of an afterlife and aren't religious. They seem to essentially laugh off any sort of a notion that any of this could be attributable to a ghost, especially Jackie. And after Michael calls out into the room, "If there is a ghost, show us a sign," receiving zero response, he walks away from his parents, confused and slightly embarrassed by their reactions. He then gets ready for work for the day. Later that night, however, what the couple experiences yet again is no laughing matter. The ghostly wails of an unseen child echo all throughout the house and all around Michael and Anne's room. Huddled together, holding one another yet again, and praying with Michael's rosary, their prayers grow louder in an attempt to compete with the volume of the cries. Their prayers are soon interrupted, however, by their door opening suddenly. It's Jackie, asking them just what was going on. Why were they praying and becoming louder and louder? Michael asked him if he too heard the baby's cries. Jackie would respond with, "All I hear is you two praying." He then scolds them both, obviously having heard nothing. He slams the door behind him when he exits their room. Michael is left speechless. It seems like whatever entity residing within the home is possibly targeting him and Anne. And somehow, some way, the rest of his family wasn't experiencing what they were. Needless to say, the two wouldn't get much sleep that night either. Roughly a week later, as Jackie and Martha come back home with baby Sarah Louise following a doctor's appointment for her, while the rest of the family is out of the house, the two take the baby upstairs to lay her down in her crib for her afternoon nap. Opening the door to her bedroom, though, they are shocked by what they see. There on the floor, surrounded by all of her toys, is a music box, and it's eerily playing its song. At first, Jackie blames his son and fiancé, thinking they must be playing a trick on them to try and convince them of their ghost theory. He then begins to feel something else, something he can't so easily explain, as if he's being watched. He then begins to wonder if perhaps they could be right. The rest of the day would come and go. The sun would fall below the horizon, and the moon would once again rise, casting its ethereal glow over the Fahey residence. As the rest of the family sleeps in their beds, Michael and Anne are suddenly woken up by a bright flashing light. Opening their eyes and simultaneously seeing a floating orb of sorts, pulsing with a white and yellow light within their room, they huddle together, with Michael clutching his rosary as hard as he can, watching this thing move and flash before their very eyes. In Michael's own words, it was like a bright orb. It slowly dissipated, and then it just disappeared. Following the sighting of this orb, the unearthly cries begin again. The couple again would not sleep much this night. The following morning, as the Fahys sit down at the table for breakfast together, Michael and Anne describe to everyone just what they had experienced the night before. This starts a bit of family drama. Esther, although not religious, was still scared of even the thought of the paranormal. She begins to scold Michael as a result. The arguing is soon interrupted by Jackie, who says to his son, "You promised that you didn't touch those toys." Michael hadn't yet been privy to the information that his father and sister came home the other day to the toys being in a circle surrounding the music box in Martha and Sarah Louise's room. He would reply with, "What toys? I never touched any toys." In Jackie's own words, "That's when I realized we have something going on in the house. Something not normal." The tide of the conversation quickly shifts with this hideous revelation. Jackie suggests consulting a priest for help. Michael is worried that no one will believe them, so to meet somewhat in the middle, they decide that they will place a tape recorder in the baby's room to see if they can capture the supernatural cries of this ghost baby. That way they would have tangible proof that could be heard alongside their testimony in an effort to seek help. Later that night, as Michael and Jackie head upstairs to place the tape recorder in the room, they realize that they've left the tapes downstairs. They then set the recorder on one of the dressers while they head back downstairs. After retrieving the tapes, they would then hear a violent commotion coming from upstairs. Rushing back upstairs and back into the room as fast as they could, would come face to face with something that neither of them could explain. There on the floor before them was the tape recorder. However, it had been completely destroyed, mangled, as if someone had deliberately, with a strong hand, torn it apart. While father and son try and decipher the mystery of the destroyed tape recorder, cries suddenly erupt from downstairs. There before Esther and Anne's eyes, the curtains, as if with a mind of their own, begin opening and closing rapidly. Jackie and Michael would soon rush downstairs to see just what had happened. In Jackie's words, that moment of fear, seeing the pure fear in Esther's eyes, was just horrible. With everyone terrified by what was taking place, Jackie decides that enough is enough. Without grabbing much of anything, the entire family runs out of the house and takes refuge with nearby neighbors who have been close friends for years. The neighbors are extremely helpful and supportive. They allow the family to stay the night with them. They all have collectively decided that they will call the church in the morning to seek assistance. It takes several days after the initial phone call, but a local parish priest does come to conduct a blessing within the Fahey house. As the father reads his prayers out loud, with the Faheys surrounding him, they all begin to hear the wailing of a baby. However, young Sarah Louise, once again, is not making the cries. Jackie would later say that the more prayers that the priest was saying, the more that the ghost baby screamed. It was as if it was saying, "Get out. We don't want you here." The priest, although putting up a strong front and acting as if he wasn't hearing the cries that the rest of the family were, Michael can tell by the look in his eyes that he is absolutely petrified. Esther begins shaking because she is so frightened. After the priest blesses the living room area downstairs, he then begins heading upstairs and blessing each room one by one. Meanwhile, a storm is brewing outside. The dark and swollen clouds are nearly ready to unleash. When it's time for the priest to bless Sarah Louise and Martha's room, as Jackie goes to open the door, it won't budge at first. As he shoves into it, he realizes that the crib has been placed in front of the door. After pushing it open, he tells the father that there has to be something within their house. Although the priest seems to be in a state of denial, he continues with the blessing. He says several more prayers and flicks some holy water around the room. As he finishes, he quickly, almost frantically leaves the house. As Michael would later say in regards to the situation, it was as if he couldn't wait to get out of the house. He nearly ran out the door. The clouds, which had gathered earlier, finally began to rain down upon the earth. Feeling hopeful that the blessing done by the priest perhaps cast out whatever was dwelling within their home, the Faheys returned to their home. However, to be on the safe side, they decide to sleep in the living room together as thunder and lightning crackle outside. While everyone else sleeps, Jackie suddenly wakes up to the cries of the ghost baby yet again. Oddly though, He seems to be the only one disturbed back to consciousness by its cries. As he follows the cries upstairs, they suddenly cease for a moment, and feeling as if he was being watched from behind, he quickly turns around to see something that sends a cold shiver down his spine. There, on a nearby table, was a small vase. Right before his eyes, he watches it levitate, as if picked up by invisible hands. It slowly tilts and then drops to the floor, shattering it into many pieces. The shock of what he had just witnessed causes Jackie to try and run away, but he trips backwards and partially falls down the stairs. Scrambling, he gets back to his feet and runs through the living room. He then throws open the front door and collapses off the porch and into the front yard. As the rest of his family surrounds him, he finally comes back to his senses. The family once again takes refuge with their neighbors and friends several houses away. It is here in their living room that they debate just how exactly to tackle this situation. Whether to travel 4 hours away to stay with Jackie's sister temporarily, or to stay here somehow. But where? They can't move in with their neighbors. As they discuss what they should do, Jackie and Michael decide to go back together to the house and pack necessary items for whatever the future may hold. Thankfully, they encounter no paranormal resistance to their presence when they obtain these items from the house. Jackie would call his sister and arrange for him and Esther to travel to her 4 hours away for the weekend. Although he wants his kids, Sarah Louise and Anne, to join them, they have jobs that they must get to in the morning. Martha also says that the entity has never bothered her or the baby, which is true. He doesn't feel great about their decision, but decides to go ahead and go after he's reassured by Michael that he will keep them in the loop with anything and everything and will do his best to keep them all safe. After the parents depart, Michael, Anne, Martha, and Sarah Louise return to the Fahey house. The rest of the night is surprisingly quiet for the first time in what feels like forever. The following morning, with Michael and Anne at work, Martha relaxes on the couch and reads a book while her baby sleeps. But not for long. The peace is soon shattered by the cries of her daughter. Placing the book on the coffee table, she quickly heads upstairs to tend to her. The door, however, is closed, and she didn't close it. Finding this strange to say the least, she grabs the handle and goes to open it, but it won't move. It's as if a large, invisible person is pushing it from the other side. As Sarah Louise cries for her mother, Martha frantically begins to throw her entire body into the door in an effort to open it. It doesn't move whatsoever. Panicking now, she runs to a neighbor for help. As her and the neighbor rush back to her house and upstairs to the room, the neighbor searches through their toolbox to try and find something, anything that'll help open the door, when it suddenly and gently opens. The two then look at each other in awe. Quickly grabbing her baby, Martha then grabs her bag, and together with the neighbor, they all flee the house. Later that evening, as Michael and Anne both return home from work, they notice that there's a note on the door. It tells them that Martha and the baby are at a nearby neighbor's house. Thinking nothing of it, as Michael goes to fetch his sister and his niece, Anne stays back at the house. As she sits in the living room waiting for her fiancé to return, she suddenly hears the sound of something moving. Glancing around the room for the source, she realizes that a picture of Sarah Louise on a nearby table is shaking profusely. It then, as if aggressively thrown, hits the nearby wall and falls to the floor, shattering the glass that once held the photo in the frame. Upon seeing this, Anne screams and bolts out the front door as fast as she can. Upon doing this, she runs into Michael, Martha, and the baby. She then frantically tries to explain to Michael just what had taken place. She feels that if they go back into the house, that whatever presence that was there would harm Sarah Louise, with Martha agreeing that she didn't want to return either after what had happened earlier. Michael relents and tells them to get in the car. Martha then lets him know that she needs diapers from the baby's room before they go. Agreeing to fetch them, Michael runs inside and grabs them as well as the baby's car carrier. Before leaving the house, however, he picks up the phone to make a phone call to his parents to let them know just what had happened. Upon dialing his aunt's number to call them, he hears several dial tones, but then begins to hear faint voices on the other end. These voices then began to change in pitch, going from higher to lower in a very unsettling way. Hanging up the phone and then trying again, the phone begins to call and then suddenly emits a horrendous, high-pitched noise directly into his ear. Throwing the phone down, he's absolutely stricken by what he sees. The phone itself is completely melted and is still smoking. With eyes wide, Michael then runs out of the house, but upon exiting the door, he is then shoved out as the door slams behind him. He would later say that, "I was utterly shocked, and I didn't know how, but the phone itself was melted. I then felt like someone was shoving me, like I was being forced out of the house." Disturbed and taking the hint that they were unwanted, the four of them depart and drive the 4 hours to stay with Jackie and Esther at Jackie's sister's house for the rest of the weekend. Several days later, the Fahey's reluctantly return to the house, but none of them want to. Esther felt as if the house wasn't hers anymore, that it had been taken over by whatever this thing was. With a long wait list for housing, the family is effectively stuck where they are. Trying to make the best of it, they decide to go inside. Upon opening the door, however, they come face to face with utter destruction. It's as if a cyclone has hit the inside of their house. The curtains are ripped. The pictures are broken. Furniture and items disheveled. Things of all kinds are thrown everywhere with reckless abandon. In the words of Michael, it was as if someone had come in and ransacked the place. But there was nothing missing, no evidence of a break-in. Angry and upset, the Faheys began to try and pick up the mess that was their lives now. It seemed as if the stress of it all was tugging at the seams that were holding them all together. Tired of dealing with it all, the family tries to brainstorm just how they could get help. The blessing of a Catholic priest didn't seem to work. They ponder what if they contact the papers. Will they be made fun of? Maybe. But could someone potentially hear of their story and reach out to help them? That was also a very real possibility. Deciding to take the risk, hoping that it'll result in some real help, they decide to reach out to a Dublin radio station with their story. As a result, a local paper decides to come and interview the Faheys and see just what exactly is happening. The family agrees to the interview, and it is decided that a reporter will come, not only to interview the family, but they'll stay the night with them to to see if they experience any ghostly phenomenon. The reporter they send is skeptical and doesn't believe in anything like the paranormal, but decides to stay anyways. The Fahey's have noticed certain changes that would signal that something was about to occur within the home. One of those signals was that it would grow exceptionally cold beforehand. This very thing would happen with the reporter present. Sitting at the dining room table, beginning to write her story, she didn't believe that anything was going to occur. As she speaks, the family conversation is suddenly shattered by the sound of something breaking. Rushing to the living room where the sounds seem to have originated from, they find a shattered porcelain figure on the floor. Its small, minute fragments strewn everywhere. Upon seeing this, the reporter is shaken to her core. It's clear that she's convinced that there's something in the home now, considering everyone was all together in the kitchen when the figure was broken. Deciding to take a photo of the broken figure, she keeps writing in the kitchen, and she doesn't sleep through the night. As a result of her article, the story begins to get picked up by more local newspapers, and soon press from all over Europe is intrigued by what is dubbed the Galway Ghost. Naturally, with the press came harassment. Reporters, news stations, and onlookers soon flocked to the Fahey residence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the alleged haunting for themselves. With this newfound fame that they didn't ask for, the Faheys begin to worry that they will only be the subject of ridicule and that no one will hear their cries for help. Fortunately, they would be dead wrong. Several weeks after the story broke and gained traction, a reporter would reach out to the family and offer the assistance of a professional they knew, a woman named Sandra Ramdani. Sandra is a well-known parapsychologist and healer. She has stated that psychic abilities are an innate part of the human consciousness and that they are not supernatural powers. She also rejects the term psychic, as she said it is misappropriated by frauds. After speaking with the family, within a week, they welcome her at their door. Michael would describe meeting her like this. When Sandra arrived and stepped in the door, we got this warm feeling as if we had known her for 100 years. After introducing herself to the family, Sandra begins to ask them just what all they had been experiencing. So the family started at the beginning. One thing she really took to was that the activity began shortly after the arrival of Sarah Louise into their lives and home. Asking the family to take her to the room where they felt the most activity in, they would lead her to the baby's room. Walking around the room and feeling it out to see if she could decipher just what kind of spirit they were dealing with, she picks up on something else as well. She asks the family if there's been any recent construction in the house. Surprised by her question, Michael would answer her with a yes, that the neighbors had been doing some work on their home, and it had occurred right around the same time that Sarah Louise was born and came to live with them. In Jackie's words, "It freaked me out when she was able to tell me that the neighbors were doing construction." Asking to be alone in the room for a time to see if she could gather any more information, the family leaves Sandra within. As she closes her eyes and begins to focus, hoping to make contact with whatever could be there, she starts to feel a cold air on her skin, causing her to get goosebumps, and then she begins to smell as if there's smoke within the room. She is then drawn into a vision. In this vision, she is in an entirely different room. There's a young woman screaming. She seems to be giving birth. Within the room there appears to be a man, possibly her father. His eyes seemed angry, yet sad. Glancing around the room, Then she sees a second man lurking within the shadows. His face is stern, and he too seems as if he could be angry. The screams continue for a short while, and then they turn into heavy breathing as the cries of a newborn baby fill the air. They then start up again, but these screams are different. They seem desperate in a sense. The young mother seems to be reaching forward for her baby, but the child seems to be in one of the men's arms. It's her father, but instead of nurturing the infant, he instead has placed some kind of cloth over its face and is smothering it. The other man then restrains the mother as she continues to scream. Sandra, gasping, then opens her eyes. The vision has ceased. Warm tears are slowly trickling down her face. She is shocked by what has been revealed to her. Walking downstairs to greet the family, they can tell she's obviously shook up. She then sits down with them in the living room to explain just what all she saw and was able to figure out. She tells the family that she believes the baby was born out of wedlock, and out of shame, its life was taken by the girl's father. That the ghost baby wasn't haunting the house that the Fahey's now lived in, but rather the land itself. She also believes that the construction by the neighbors inadvertently disturbed the spirit, causing it to become active again, and because it never got to live or feel the love and affection of its mother, that it desperately wanted to get close to Martha, since she had just become a new mother herself. Asking what could be done now, Sandra offers to conduct a healing ceremony in hopes of allowing the spirit to find peace and move on to the other side. The family would agree. First things first, Sandra asks them to please get Sarah Louise out of the house before the ceremony. Needing Martha to be a part of the ritual, it is decided that the baby will be taken on a stroll by Esther and Jackie. The rest of the family alongside Sandra then heads upstairs to the child's room to begin the ceremony.
What she did was then she went up to the baby's room and she placed a rose quartz crystal and a snow white quartz crystal in the cot as a focal point, as the baby in the cot. Then what she did was then she actually communicated with the ghost by telepathic abilities, and she found out that it happened about 100 years ago. It was a baby boy that was smothered at birth. This baby was just a newborn baby.
And who killed the baby?
The mother and father.
And this happened not in the house, but on that bit of land where the house is now built.
That's right.
It is explained that amber incense will be burned to protect them during the event and to promote spiritual healing of the ghost as well. She then lays down quartz crystals in the four corners of the room in order to purify and recharge the home itself. They then place an empty baby carrier on the ground in the center of the room and join hands surrounding it. They all then close their eyes and begin to take deep breaths to focus on the task at hand. Sandra tells them to imagine the ghost baby laying in the bassinet before them, surrounded by a golden light, to focus on him, to tell him it's time to move forward and move on.
And then you see the very last part of the ceremony was actually, it was the most important part. And I saw the spirit actually been lifted up and taken away into the far side, as she called it, or into heaven, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it.
You saw that yourself?
Yeah. And
what exactly did you see?
Well, what she did first, she put us all into a circle, right? And she said, imagine the baby in the circle. And then she telepathically linked with us by moving energy around the circle. And then she told us, think we're breathing in golden sunlight and breathing out tears and unhappiness and sadness. And she said, keep concentrating. And I could actually see the baby on the floor.
Can we just get that clear, Michael? Did you see it?
Yes.
You saw it?
I did see it, yes. And we were doing the exercise, breathing and concentrating. And then she said, just keep concentrating. And then she said, imagine the golden light going out to the top of your head. And at that moment, I saw the baby being lifted up into the light, and then it just disappeared.
And it left peacefully?
It left peacefully, yes.
Upon the ghost baby crossing over, the feeling is almost immediately night and day. It's as if everyone and everything could breathe again. With everyone amazed and so very happy that the infant had crossed over, the feeling of joy and peace filled the home once again. Jackie and Esther, who had been outside walking with Sarah Louise, returned as well, and they too could instantly sense that the ghost was gone. This is what would be considered a happy ending for most, but the Galway ghost still haunts the minds of the Fahey family. Every time they hear a knock or something seems out of place, they fear that perhaps what should be gone isn't. That maybe it's always there, watching and waiting to return. This was a highly requested case, and a very interesting one at that. I did have some of my personal takes on this case, as well as some resources and questions that I'd like to share with you now before we go, and this will be in no particular order. So this case apparently has been tied to a scandal that took place between a priest and a family, with the priest having impregnated the daughter a long time ago. This information comes from Jackie, whose real name actually appears to be Jonathan Fahey, from his book, Cry from Beyond. If this is true, it would very much corroborate the ghost baby story, in my opinion. I, however, am a little more skeptical of this ghost baby, having felt the energy in a home supposedly haunted by a little girl, aka the Sally House. Albeit things may vary on a case-by-case basis, I do believe that entities and or demons can masquerade themselves as children in order to exploit the vulnerable. Ask yourself this: why would a child, an innocent newborn baby, cause such dread and fear among the Faheys? For this very reason, although they may have crossed over a baby's spirit, makes me believe that something more sinister haunted their home, that perhaps following this event, for one reason or another, this entity went dormant. It seems that construction kicked off the activity by disturbing the ghost that was already dormant there in the beginning. I believe this probably played a role, having had constructions wake up ghosts in an old home of mine. This led to some very strange experiences, such as hearing a chorus of whispers and having night terrors, which was not a fun time. I also like how the plumbers couldn't smell any of the smells that the Faheys were, as in the disgusting ones. I think perhaps they were desensitized to an extent. Maybe this played a role in that. As a former painter, Meg can tell you that my sense of smell is pretty much cooked. I'm sure, depending on your profession, for one reason or another, people get nose blind. I dug as much as I could, but I could not find any updates on the Faheys past 2006. The initial case took place from 1996 into 1997, and it seemed as if the family still lived in the same residence as of 2006. I hope wherever they are now, that they're peaceful and happy. I was only able to find one photo that I believe is the real residence in which the case took place in, and I will show it to you now, but on the off chance that someone still lives there, whether it's the Faheys or anyone, please respect people's privacy and do not harass or bother them. Thank you. With how the home was designed, it would be nearly impossible for someone to have accessed the window in that room on the second floor, to have been able to move the crib in front of the door, and then close it to cause resistance to the door being opened. Just how did the phone end up melting? I do know that in most of Europe, the power is much stronger than it is here in the United States, but there would have been some kind of serious malfunction for a surge to be that powerful that it melted the phone. I always found that aspect of the case to be exceptionally creepy. It doesn't surprise me that Ireland has so many folk and ghost tales. It seems to be such a mysterious yet beautiful place that I'd certainly like to visit one day. I did want to give a shout out to my Irish fans. I hope I did this infamous story justice for you guys, and I did want to ask, had you heard of this case before I covered it? With that, everyone, please like the video if you liked it, share it around, subscribe with notifications on, and please leave me a comment letting me know what you thought down in the comments below. I say this often, but all this stuff really helps me out tremendously. I did want to let you know that I did revamp my store with some new and much cooler merchandise as well, and I restocked on books, so if you wanted to pick anything up, now would definitely be the time. Other than that, guys, I love and appreciate all of you, truly. Thank you so much for your patience as always. And this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time.